straight like that.
Every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell the list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com. And you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you. Years of strategy and struggle against the prison industrial complex. It's a collection of essays. This one is by David Gilbert on page 31, titled "The System Within the System, the Prison Industrial Complex and Imperialism." For those of us held behind locked gates within the walls and fences topped with razor wire, the corrections regime is the system that works tirelessly to impose total control over every aspect of our lives. Yet as ponderous and powerful as prisons are, they're only one part, a central girder, of a much bigger and more foreboding house of horrors, which can most accurately be named imperialism. The structural needs of the larger edifice set the specifications for the size and position of the girder. The strength of the girder helps determine how long the building itself will stand. We can't understand the explosion of imprisonment in the United States since 1971 without looking at an imperialism's urgent needs and goals of that period. By the same token, we can't develop an effective program around the prison industrial complex without grappling with the stresses and trends of the larger system of imperial rule. To be clear, before you take time to read this chapter, I don't offer any brilliant ideas on strategy. Those will most likely emerge from the organizing and activist efforts themselves. However, some of the concerns discussed may raise questions that go into forming strategy. I definitely look forward to learning from the dialogues that this generates on these issues. Imperialism may sound like the kind of rhetoric we want to avoid, but it's one word that needs to be rescued as the best way to name the system that rules over us. The basis of imperialism is the relentless quest for profits around the globe. Its most striking characteristic is the colossal and grotesque polarization of wealth. That polarization happens between nations, between the rich countries of the North and the impoverished ones of the global South, the impoverished countries of Africa, Latin America, and parts of Asia, and at the same time within each country based on class, race, and gender. The poles of dazzling wealth and abject poverty are intimately linked, as the former results from the ruthless plunder of the latter. This system is built on and intensifies all the major forms of oppression: patriarchy, capitalism, and white supremacy, all of which are structurally central. At the same time, imperialism highlights the global character of the system in a way that explains why the most intense oppression and resistance have been in the South, and that also provides the context for why the liberation struggles of the various people of color have been in the forefront within the U.S. There's no way to capture what the system costs in human life and potential, the pain and loss for all of us. Close to 1 billion human beings suffer chronic hunger, while another 2 billion face nutritional deficiencies. 1 billion lack access to clean drinking water. Just looking at children under the age of 5, imperialism is a holocaust in progress. Over 9 million die every year from easily preventable causes associated with poverty. The price for future generations may be even more severe as the rapaciousness of this global frenzy for profits threatens the very ecological basis for sustaining human life on any scale on our planet. Since most people won't accept living in squalor amid plenty, imperialism entails both the most sophisticated and the most brutal forms of social control. Its most salient feature is war, war after war after war, mainly against the peoples of the South. The domestic front line of such repression is a truly violent and harmful prison industrial complex. Today, 2,300,000 people are held behind bars, about 7 times the number in 1971. That explosion was unprecedented, coming after a 70-year period when the rates of imprisonment had remained more or less constant. This dramatic change did not result from some sudden skyrocketing of criminal activity, but rather from a radical expansion of what was designated as a crime and a draconian increase in the punishments for those crimes. Such extreme measures were driven by considerations way beyond criminal justice and often at cross purposes to the proclaimed goal of public safety. These destructive changes were born from crisis, one much more severe and protracted than the periodic ups and downs of the business cycles that occur over a roughly 10-year period, but rather a situation that threatened the very survival of the system. Such structural crises occur because capitalism is by its nature unstable. The economy is vast and complicated, but the major decisions are made by a tiny corporate and financial elite, with each thinking only of his own profits. When a structural crisis develops, the long-term institutional arrangements that assured a reliable flow of profits and the rule of capital no longer function. One dramatic example was the Great Depression of the 1930s, followed by World War II. At the end of that period, a new set of international institutions, such as the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, were created. At the same time, a new deal was hammered out for the terms of the bargain between capital and labor within the U.S. Those arrangements worked well for capital until they broke down a generation later. That new structural crisis, which emerged between 1968 and 73, is the seedbed for the burgeoning of the prison industrial complex and many related changes in U.S. history. The first and most obvious signs were political, as the resistance to imperialism crested in 1968. Abolition now.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, it's a beautiful, what is it, Wednesday? Yeah, it's Wednesday. What a beautiful day. Welcome to our program. Thom Hartmann here with you. Our number 202-808-9925. Some interesting stuff. We're going to get into the Republican Party saving its soul in just a moment. Donald Trump saying, go ahead, break the law. I'll take care of you later. This is like extremely illegal. This guy is like a mob boss, and you've got to think of him as a mob boss. He's moving $300 million out of FEMA to pay for detention facilities for children. And he's trying to burn down our rainforest. Congressman Ro Khanna will be with us for the third hour today of our program. And for the second hour of our program, a special guest, I'll tell you all about him when he gets here. He's a politician here in Oregon who has decided to do a primary challenge against a corporate Democrat in this state. And I think this is a really good thing. So, we will, a very toxic corporate Democrat, not just your run-of-the-mill variety. So anyhow, and he's going to talk to us about, building political consensus and getting into the political process and all that sort of thing. The tweet of the week goes to Jesse Lifson. Arkansas Granny caught this over on DU. Here's the tweet. Trump is announcing a partnership with Bed, Bug, and Beyond. I love it. Okay, the bombshell that is evolving right in front of our eyes, and I think that this will probably fuel a serious and outraged effort at impeachment, is that it's increasingly looking like two things happened. Number one, that Donald Trump's not a billionaire. In fact, he may have a negative net worth. He's probably broke. When you take out all the loans he's got nothing left. But or at least it's looking that way. And David K. Johnston talking about this. Number one. Number two, that the loans that he did get, he got through Deutsche Bank. It's the only bank that's been willing to lend to him for years and years and years. And they were apparently, now this is David K. Johnston reported this last night at MSNBC, co-signed by oligarchs. Now, it looks like most of these are Russian oligarchs, but he's saying, hey, look at Saudi oligarchs, look at United Arab Emirates oligarchs, and given Mike Flynn lobbying for Turkey and Trump helping him cover that up, maybe Turkish oligarchs. So we don't know who the billionaires are who co-signed Donald Trump's loans, but at least several of them are Russians, and that's the kind of thing that Robert Mueller was specifically not allowed to look into. In the charter that authorized him, it basically said he could not look at Trump's finances, and so he didn't. He never got his tax returns. He never dug into this stuff. So number one, it looks like Deutsche Bank made these loans to Donald Trump with Russian and other oligarchs, possibly other oligarchs, co-signing the notes. That tells you why Donald Trump has been behaving the way he has, number one, at least with regard to Russia. And then number two, it looks like the guy who oversaw those loans was a fellow by the name of Justin Kennedy at Deutsche Bank. Justin Kennedy was the son of Justice Anthony Kennedy. And at Trump's inauguration, he walked up to Kennedy and he said, and I tweeted this, a link to this story, it was in Politico at the time. He walked up to Anthony Kennedy, he said, say hello to your boy, special guy. And Kennedy said, well, your kids have been very nice to him. And Trump says, well, they love him, and they love him in New York. In other words, I own your son. And as the story started coming out, and it was actually a Dutch documentary, and I've seen this. I saw it a while ago, and it's pretty shocking. And it makes basically it makes the claim that Donald Trump has been in bed with organized crime, specifically Russian organized crime, for well over a decade, maybe several decades, since his spate of bankruptcies in the late 90s. And that's the only reason that he's functioning. So Trump basically puts Kennedy on notice that his son is at risk. If I go down, your son goes down. And then does he whisper to Kennedy, hey, things are coming to a head and I'm having a hard time protecting your boy. And Kennedy leaves the Supreme Court so that Trump can put Kavanaugh on there, thus solidifying his vote with the Christian evangelicals, which is a large chunk of white Southerners, well, all over the country, but particularly in the South, and solidifying his support from the right-wing fundamentalists. Jerry Falwell Jr., by the way, now we have another young man, a 23-year-old young man, who Jerry Falwell Jr. has befriended and given millions of dollars worth of real estate to, which is very strange. Apparently, some of the real estate that Liberty University had or was affiliated with Liberty University ended up with this young man. It's like weird stuff going on. So, but, Trump solidified Jerry Falwell Jr.'s, support by doing this. And Anthony Kennedy steps down. So, where does this go? And what is this going to do for the Republican Party? I mean, it's increasingly looking like the economy is on the edge of crashing. The Trump's tax returns show that he was only able to keep himself out of bankruptcy with loans from Deutsche Bank, engineered by the son of Supreme Court Justice Anthony Kennedy and co-signed by Russian oligarchs. If that trifecta hits, and I think we're close to it, and I think, frankly, a lot of people in the news business might be thinking, let's do this after Labor Day when there's more people paying attention. So, my guess is we're going to see this story hit on Tuesday or Wednesday of next week. But In any case, if this trifecta hits and the Republicans realize that Trump basically blackmailed Anthony Kennedy to leave the Supreme Court, that Trump is wholly owned by foreign billionaires and probably isn't even a multimillionaire himself, and the economy starts to go south in a big way, which, by the way, the yield curve fully inverted yesterday for the first time since 2007. The yield curve, there's like 4 or 5 different bonds that short-term bonds that have to have this inverted relationship with the 20-year notes, with the long-term bonds. And the last of those dominoes fell yesterday. So if that happens, if that trifecta happens, if the economy goes south, if it comes out that Trump is owned by foreign billionaires, and there's some evidence that Trump blackmailed Kennedy into leaving the Supreme Court by threatening his son, I'm thinking that the Republicans are going to face this horrible decision. Do we lose 49 states on Election Day and lose control of the Senate? Or do we figure out a way to replace Trump on the 2020 ticket? I've been talking about this for a couple of weeks now, that I think that there's a very real possibility that you're going to see a Pence-Haley ticket. I mean, this is an existential crisis and decision point for the Republican Party. Are they going to continue to be the party of corrupt American and foreign oligarchs? People like the Kochs and the Mercers and all these other, right-wing billionaires who have been willing to throw, hundreds or tens, well, it depends on the billionaire, but lots of millions of dollars into dark money pools that are relatively untraceable in order to influence elections. Are they going to continue to be the party of the corrupt American and foreign oligarchs with a base that's fueled by right-wing racist hate, which is pretty much all they've got? Or will the Republican Party as an institution, quote, move left and become a functioning American political party again, like they were under the last honest Republican president, Dwight Eisenhower? Now, if they don't decide to move left and become the party of Dwight Eisenhower and arguably Mitt Romney, the Republican Party might go the way of the Whigs, a political party that no longer exists. Or if the Republican Party stays in power and all this stuff happens, and they don't ditch their billionaire owners, and they continue trying to rig elections. Indiana was just blocked, by the way, by a 3-judge tribunal in the 7th Court, as I recall, 7th U.S. Court of Appeals, from purging people, American voters, on the voting rolls in Indiana using the interstate cross-check list. I don't know how many other states are trying to do this right now, but Indiana passed a law, their Republican-controlled legislature passed a law in 2017, last year, year before last, saying that they could do this. It's been on hold because of a court challenge, and the federal appeals court just said, nope, you can't do it. Now, the Supreme Court told Ohio that they could do something very similar to this. So this will probably go to the Supreme Court. And maybe just in time for the next election, Indiana will get to, like 17 million Americans have been purged from voting rolls nationwide, mostly in Republican states, just since the 2016 election. So anyhow, if Republicans continue down that road with their billionaire owners, foreign and domestic, and rigging elections, we're going to become a full oligarchy. I mean, Jimmy Carter on this program a couple of years ago said America is no longer a functioning democracy, it's now an oligarchy. I agree, but not an explicit oligarchy. In other words, everybody doesn't just, sit around and say, yeah, of course, the billionaires are running the country and that's a good thing. We will become an explicit oligarchy, an autocracy, and Trump will become an autocrat. I mean, he's trying to be one right now. Hey, I'll pardon you if you commit some crimes, if you'll use eminent domain to steal some land from those farmers in Texas to build my wall. No problem, I'll pardon you. Excuse me? Now the White House is saying, oh, well, Trump was just joking. He wasn't joking. This is how mob bosses talk. Don't worry, I'll take care of you. On the other hand, if the Republican Party, looks in the mirror and says, holy cow, we're doing this, really? And collectively says, we're going to go back to Dwight Eisenhower. We're going to go back to being the cloth coat Republicans, the people that Richard Nixon portrayed himself as. If they do that, they'll probably lose a few elections over the short term. but the republic will remain intact. Fascinating stuff. There's also a bombshell survey out about Democratic voters' support for Medicare for All. And it's shocking. I got to tell you about this too. 18 minutes past the hour, it's the Thom Hartmann Program. And it's Anything Goes Summer.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
At least for the rest of the week, it's Anything Goes Summer. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And oh my goodness. So, you know, I want to go off on this a little bit more because I think that this is really, really consequential. This, one of the very best of our, economic correspondents these days is David K. Johnston. And David K. Johnston has come out and said, just explicitly, and this was like last night on Lawrence O'Donnell's show, just explicitly said, these loans, these Deutsche Bank loans, are being co-signed by Russian oligarchs. And I mean, this is, to say the very least, this is problematic. And he's also, after Lawrence had this conversation with him, then he went on to have a conversation with, actually, I'm not sure if I didn't see Lawrence's show. I'm reading this from news reports. But it looks like after that, what happened was that John Heilman, the commentator for MSNBC and, general political guy, he co-authored a book with Mark, what's his name, the guy who's now disgraced, who's trying to make a comeback. Say that?
Sanford.
No. Heilman's, just came right out and said, if this is the case, this is the skeleton key that unlocks everything. That everybody's been wondering, why is it that Trump will not challenge anything that Putin does or anything that any of the other oligarch billionaires around the world or any of the other people who are owned by oligarchs are doing? I mean, we think of Duterte in the Philippines, for example, as, a terrible guy. But the bottom line is he's there because he's supported by the oligarchs in the Philippines. We think of, Erdogan in Turkey as a terrible guy. But the fact is he's there because he's supported by the oligarchs in Turkey. And, what you have to do is reset the phone system right now. And this is a serious problem, right? But, and Bolsonaro, he's owned by the oligarchs in Brazil, who are busily now burning down the rainforest. And Trump is apparently owned by oligarchs as well. So when we talk about oligarchies or when we talk about these governments that are autocratic, what we're also talking about is not just the face and the front. It's not just Bolsonaro or Duterte or in India, Modi, or in Turkey. It's not just that. It's the oligarchs behind these autocrats. You wouldn't have had Hitler if you didn't have Fritz Thyssen funding him. I mean, he wrote a book after World War II titled "I Paid Hitler," basically, an apology, saying, here's why I did this. Here's what I understood. So, anyhow, we'll be right back. It's 22 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Stick around. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And so anyhow, let me get into some of this other stuff. This is pretty amazing stuff. There's a new poll out, and this new poll is the Politico Morning Consult poll. This is it's a real poll, right? Politico, and the Politico Morning Consult tracking survey shows. Now, keep in mind, you've got some Democrats, Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren specifically, who are saying Medicare for all. And some of the ones who didn't make it were saying, Tom Steyer was saying that, and he apparently is not making the debates. And then you've got some Democrats who are saying, well, something in between. Kamala Harris has recalibrated her Medicare for all to say Medicare for all, but will allow people to have private health insurance if they want. And even, I suppose, to some extent, Bernie has, slightly modified the Medicare for all to, so that if a union has a particularly good, for-profit health insurance plan that they like and they want to keep, they can. In other words, we're not going to outlaw private health insurance, which I think is wise, actually. So there's that kind of middle ground. And then there's the Biden position, which is held by a bunch of other people who are trying to get in the White House. And, the so-called moderate, well, it was Hickenlooper. I mean, Hickenlooper now, he's running for the Senate in Colorado, and 6 Democratic women wrote, major stakeholders in Colorado, elected officials, wrote a letter to the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee, the DSCC, saying, please withdraw your endorsement of Hickenlooper. He's a corporate Democrat and he's not going to win against Cory Gardner. And we should have the right to compete against him in the primary, and one of us should win. So anyhow, we'll see where that goes. But anyhow, the poll shows that 57% of Democrats say they would be more likely to vote for a candidate who backs the Medicare for all health system over expanding the Affordable Care Act. That was in January, 57%. The new number, they just did a new poll this week. It was released today. The new number is not 57% of Democrats who want Medicare for all. It's now 65% of Democrats will vote for a candidate who says they're in favor of Medicare for all. And what percentage of Democratic primary voters, when asked, would you vote for somebody who is in favor of Medicare for all, or would you rather vote for somebody who wants to tweak Obamacare and improve it? Only 13% said that they would support somebody who just wants to tweak the system. That's pretty amazing. And, we'll see where this goes. Meanwhile, this economy just keeps on destroying people. The post-Reagan economy, this neoliberal economy that we've had for nearly 40 years now, where the middle class has gotten progressively poor. Every decade, the middle class gets poorer. Now, fewer than 50% of working Americans are in the middle class, even. But the millennials are particularly hard hit. Millennials, their home ownership is 8% lower than it was for my generation at that age, or even, my Gen X kids. The net worth of your average millennial household is 40% lower than Gen X households. That was back in 2001, and 20% lower than it was for my generation, the baby boomers, at the end of the 1980s. And it looks like the biggest actor in this, the biggest thing that is causing this, is student loan debt, which is, a particular problem for at least one Democratic presidential candidate. We'll be back. It's 28 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll be right back. You got it. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study by Stefano Harney and Fred Moten. This is from the introduction. It starts with love, exchange, fellowship, It ends as it begins, in motion, in between various modes of being and belonging, and on the way to new economies of giving, taking, being with, and for. And it ends with a ride in a Buick Skylark on a way to another place altogether. Surprising, perhaps, after we have engaged dispossession, debt, dislocation, and violence, but not surprising when you have understood that the projects of fugitive planning and black study are mostly about reaching out to find connection. They are about making common cause with the brokenness of being, a brokenness, I would venture to say, that is also blackness, that remains blackness, and will, despite all, remain broken, because this book is not a prescription for repair. If we do not seek to fix what has been broken, then what? How do we resolve to live with brokenness, with being broke, which is also what Moten and Harney called debt? Well, given that debt is sometimes a history of giving, at other times a history of taking, at all times a history of capitalism, and given that debt also signifies a promise of ownership but never delivers on that promise, we have to understand that debt is something that cannot be paid off. Debt, as Harney puts it, presumes a kind of individualized realization to a naturalized economy that is predicated upon exploitation. Can we have, he asks, another sense of what is owed that does not presume a nexus of activities like recognition and acknowledgement, payment and gratitude? Can debt become a principle of elaboration? Moten links economic debt to the brokenness of being in the interview with Stefan Shukatis, who he acknowledges that some debts should be paid and that much is owed, especially to black people, by white people. And yet he says, I also know that it is, that what it is that is supposed to be repaired is irreparable. It can't be repaired. The only thing we can do is tear this stuff down completely and build something new, end of quote. The undercommons do not come to pay their debts, to repair what has been broken, to fix what has been undone. If you want to know what the undercommons wants, what Moten and Harney want, what black people, indigenous people, queers, and poor people want, what we, the we who cohabit in the space of the undercommons, want, it is this. We cannot be satisfied with the recognition and acknowledgement generated by the very system that denies A, that anything was ever broken, and B, that we deserve to be the broken part. So we refuse to ask for recognition, and instead we want to take apart, dismantle, tear down that structure right now. That right now limits our ability to find each other, to see beyond it, and to access the places that we know live outside its walls. We cannot say what new structures will replace the ones we live with yet, because once we have torn stuff down, we will inevitably see more and see differently and feel a new sense of wanting and being and becoming. What we want after the break will be different from what we think we want before the break, and both are necessarily different from the desires that issue from being in the dark. Let's come at this by another path. In the melancholic and visionary 2009 film version of Maurice Sendak's Where the Wild Things Are, 1963, Max, the small seeker who leaves his room, his home, his family to find the world beyond, finds a world of lost and lonely beasts, and they promptly make him their king. Max is the first king the wild things have had, whom they did not eat, and who did not, in turn, try to eat them. And the beasts are the first grown things that Max has met, who want his opinion, his judgment, and his rule. Max's power is that he is small while they are big. He promises the beasts that he has no plans to eat them, and that this is more than anyone has ever promised them. He promises them that he will find ways through and around, and will slip through the cracks and re-crack the cracks if they fill up. He promises to keep sadness at bay and to make the world with the wild creatures that roared their terrible roars and gnashed their terrible teeth and rolled their terrible eyes and showed their terrible claws. That Max fails to make the wild things happy or to save them or to make the world with them is less important than the fact that he found them and he recognized in them the end of something and potentially the path to an alternative in his world, or an alternative to his world, The wild things were not the utopian creatures of fairy tales. They were the rejected and lost subjects of the world Max had left behind. And because he shuttles between the Oedipal land where his mother rules and the ruined world of the wild, he knows the parameters of the real. He sees what is included and what is left out. And he is now able to set sail for another place, a place that is neither the home he left nor the home to which he wants to return. Moten and Harney want to gesture to another place, a wild place that is not simply the leftover space that limbs real and regulated zones of polite society. Rather, it is a wild place that continuously produces its own unregulated wilderness. The zone we enter through Moten and Harney is ongoing and exists in the present, and as Harney puts it, some kind of demand is already being enacted, fulfilled in the call itself. While describing the riots of London in 2011, Harney suggests that the riots and insurrections do not separate out the request, the demand, and the call. Rather, they enact the one in the other. The book is The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Okay, let's see here. JP in Marietta, Georgia. Hey, JP, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom, thank you so much for taking my call.
Sure.
So quick 5-second plug. I want to congratulate Jen Huger and TYP. In about 24 hours, they raised over $100,000 to get a climate change debate that hopefully some of the candidates will sign on to. But my main question was, I would like to know where the line, in your opinion, is for what becomes circular firing squad.
Sure. Sure.
I'm very,
Yeah, I've been saying on this program that I don't want people, for example, to call in and trash Joe Biden because he was, co-author of the bankruptcy bill that locked out students from, declaring bankruptcy on student debt and stuff like that. And pretty much I'm standing by that. But we've got a congressman here in Oregon, and I know this. Typically, I don't involve myself in primary fights at all, because I've been burned a couple of times, and you just never know who the actors are, right? But I have a house, or I had a house. We sold it. Well, we're in the process of selling it, actually. That's in Kurt Schrader's district. Kurt Schrader is the name of the congressman here in Oregon, and he represents. It's the southern part of Portland, and then it goes all the way down to Salem. And he is a key co-sponsor of a bill that prohibits states from requiring GMO labels, makes it illegal for a state to have to require GMO labels. He voted in favor of a bill to grant LNG permits. This is a big issue out here in the Pacific Northwest, these liquid natural gas, expanding liquid natural gas. He's in favor of that. In fact, he was a co-sponsor of the bill. He was in favor of what was called, criminal reform, this redefinition of violent crime that could exacerbate mass incarceration. It failed in the House. Even his colleagues wouldn't go along with it. It was like doubling down on put more people in jail. He voted yes on a bill that would require ICE to be alerted when background checks are run for gun purchases. He was the only Oregon Democrat to support the Resilient Federal Forest Act, which basically kills public oversight and weakens environmental laws. He's in deep with the timber industry, the pharmaceutical industry, Monsanto, et cetera. And if a Democrat like that, he's also the head of the Blue Dog Coalition, which is, I think, 28 or 29 Democrats in the House who kind of proudly take a lot of corporate money and vote with the Republicans most of the time, or much of the time. And if we can't primary a congressman like that, I think we've got a problem.
Well, I completely agree. We would have no AOC if it weren't for, primarying high-level or low-level corporate Democrats.
Exactly.
So I'm all for it.
But on the other hand, if there's a Democrat who's who is taking corporate money, which is the vast majority of Democrats, but isn't always dancing to their tune, isn't aggressively, sucking up to the Republicans and all that kind of stuff, then I'm not inclined to go after them. I think, and there may even be some districts where Democrats have to substantially depart from the rest of the Democratic Party on issues like abortion or guns in order to hold their seats because they just happen to be a Democratic, congressman or senator or congresswoman in a district where those are big issues. So that's my take on it, JP. Thanks a lot for the call. And in fact, the guy who's going to primary Schrader is going to be our guest at the top of the hour. He'll be, and you'll get to meet him and learn all about it. So let's see here. John in Boyne, Michigan. Hey, John. What's up?
Yeah, hi, Tom. The reason I'm calling, Tom?
Yeah, I'm listening.
I want to make a statement. this is public information, and it's how I arrived at this, but we don't quantify our arguments, and that would eliminate a lot of the political discussion and all the politics and all the divisiveness. And I'm going to use healthcare as an example. The United States taxpayers could save $15 trillion if we had a national single-payer healthcare system. And I know this because we got 320 million people, and we spend about $11,000 per capita. The second highest spending country.
You're talking $15 trillion over a decade, about $1.5 trillion a year, because we're spending about $3 trillion a year right now in healthcare, and we spend twice as much as Canada does, and we have worse outcomes.
We have the worst outcomes in the industrialized world.
That's correct.
The second highest spending country spends about $6,000 per capita. We spend $11,000. That's
correct.
A $5,000 difference.
That's right.
$5,000 times, and I'm rounding it off to 300 million people times 10 years is $15 trillion.
Yeah, exactly. No, I completely agree with your numbers, John. And in fact, when the Koch brothers ran the numbers, this is what they came up with. They tried to spin it like it wasn't, but that's exactly what they came up with, or damn close to it. So your argument is just that we need to start talking about we can save $1.5 trillion a year with a national healthcare system that is patterned after. Take your choice of any of the 30 or 40 of them out there.
Yeah, but it's a no-brainer. When you read, I don't care if you're an independent, Republican, or a Democrat.
Right.
You go to any individual and say you can save $15 trillion every 10 years, every decade. Our national debt's about $22 trillion, for Christ's sakes. Just one change in our national health care program would almost eliminate the national debt. I don't know anyone that wouldn't buy it.
Yeah, I agree. And the savings would be inured to the individual voters as well. I'm with you. Kevin in Greenwood, South Carolina. Hey, Kevin, what's up?
Hey, good afternoon, Tom. How are you?
Good. What's on your mind?
Hey, one quick question. With all of the varied opinion media that we have, how does one tell, actual truth from fiction or propaganda?
I tend to look at the sources and the reporters. I'm inclined to almost always believe something if I read it in the New York Times or the Washington Post. Not so much if I read it on Breitbart. Generally, what I find is that the left-wing sites, interestingly, Raw Story, Alternet, Common Dreams, Daily Kos, I can't tell. I think it's been at least a year since I found a really significant error of fact on any of those websites, even though Google has stopped spidering all those sites. You can't find those sites now. If you do topic searches on Google, they don't show up anymore, and they've all lost an enormous amount of traffic because of it. And I think it's because the right-wing sites have to spin and lie stuff because they've got nothing. The Republicans are offering nothing to the American people other than hate and racism and higher prices and more billionaires. So that's how I'm making the determination. Lewis in Portland. Hey, Lewis, what's up? Lewis, you're on the air. No, Lewis. Let's try Lisa in Southern Oregon. Hey, Lisa.
I'm sorry.
You're on the air.
I used to work in the insurance industry. I've had a couple of careers, but I worked for Metropolitan of New York and Mutual of New York. Mm-hmm. And I thought it was kind of ironic that, because I was educated by the disability community about single payer back when it was on the ballot in California. It was, I believe, and it only passed in San Francisco because many of the people there had AIDS. And, well, I just thought it was interesting that, ironic that Bernie is going to put in, allow the the insurance industry to continue providing health care denial to unions. But I think
if they choose to, I'm guessing that the unions are going to say no, thank you. And what he's doing here is I believe, is more of a political move than a literal, let's do this. Because
I think it's really smart. I think it's a smart move because the narrative from the right is that this is a government bureaucracy,
and you're going to lose your insurance.
You're going to lose your insurance. So this way, Bernie's saying, if you really love your insurance, you can keep it. But guess what? They'll keep it, and then once they get denied, when they have cancer,
right,
or AIDS or whatever, what they're going to do is they're going to run to the Medicare.
Exactly. Or they'll keep it for 6 months, and then either the union or the company, whoever's paying the bills, is going to look at the cost compared to Medicare for All and go, this is nuts. And that'll be the end of that. Yeah, so I think it's political jujitsu. I think it's brilliant. I agree with you.
Yeah, but also I wanted to share with you, I thought something very important, the Office of Payment Accuracy and Recovery, which is a state program here in Oregon and every state. And when I was studying, securities and all that in the insurance industry, they never told us about this. So this was something I wasn't able to tell my client. Anyway, what happens is the state, when you die, the state takes away your home and your assets if you get state health insurance, Medicaid or Medicare, whatever.
No, this is true of all the states. If you don't die broke and you have been, this only happens if you've been using Medicaid to pay for nursing care. And if you're using Medicaid, or if you go on Medicaid at all, because Medicaid is for people with extreme poverty, and if you use Medicaid to pay for those things, and you're not genuinely extreme poverty, you're not genuinely poor, then and your assets are less than 2 years old, then you have to repay that out of the estate. We went through this when my mother died, or when my mother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and it was like, oh my God, we're going to have some really big expenses here. And option one was basically to bankrupt my mom, which was to sell off her house and divide it among the kids and all that, and then wait 2 years, because you have to wait 2 years. Otherwise, the state will say, oh, this is a scam. You're trying to get around this. And then after 2 years, you go on Medicaid, and then the state doesn't come back after you. Ultimately, one of my brothers decided to take my mom in, and she lived with him until the day she died, and it was never an issue that we had to confront. But I'm certainly aware of what you're talking about, Lisa.
Yeah, but isn't it a shame that we have to jump through these kind of
Yes, it is a crime.
Well, the thing is, my father had amazing insurance, and my mother, they both worked, and we never even questioned insurance. To me, it was wonderful because I had poor vision, I needed glasses, I had all, and we always, periodically, we got our teeth cleaned, and I never remember anybody saying to my mother, "Do you have money?"
Right. Right. No, it's only when you're older, when you're retired, when you're no longer working and you no longer have insurance, because Medicare doesn't cover long-term nursing home care. That's the problem. If Medicare covered that, then everything would be good. Lisa, thank you very much for the call. We'll be right back. It's 45 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be right back with more of your calls here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Stick around. And welcome back. Tom in Hagerstown, Maryland. Hey, Tom, what's on your mind today?
A little rebranding, I think.
Mm-hmm.
A little rebranding, I think.
I'm listening.
We have Moscow Mitch.
Right.
And now we need to start calling out Trump for what he is, which is the Siberian candidate.
Huh.
He's clearly acting like unabashedly acting like a Moscow asset.
I'm guessing that 90% of Trump's followers don't know that Siberia is part of Russia.
Well, yeah, but it just seemed to me like we're in that old movie, but it's not going the way it should.
Yeah.
Nobody's reacting to his, basically his treason the way that they should be.
Yeah.
Left and right. I wish Nancy would get off the snide and start impeachment.
Well, Congress is back in a week or so, and things are going to happen. So just keep your eyes open. Thanks a lot for the call, Tom. Bill in Gulf Tree, Illinois. Hey, Bill, what's up?
Yeah, hi, Tom. It's Godfrey.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Hey, I was interested in that you already mentioned election integrity this morning, and I'm really upset. We haven't been able to trust our elections easily since the year 2000, and probably actually way before that. Whether it's Chris Kobach or Diebold or New Jim Crow or the Russians, there are all these issues. Yet we seemingly forgive, I guess, that the media is using polling, which has to be, if our elections aren't characterized by integrity, why would we believe that polling can be used as a metric, to select candidates? It seems like the DNC and corporate media are in lockstep. I'm a Bernie supporter who would like to hear what Tulsi Gabbard has to say, but it doesn't look like that's going to be the case here.
Right.
And I really can't understand that. I mean, I think really when the women voters lost the franchise of controlling the debates, we lost a real avenue to free speech.
No, I get all that, Bill, but in my opinion, Tulsi Gabbard is one of those candidates who is really probably planning at some point on running for the Senate from Hawaii. She may have started out as a serious candidate for president, but by this point, it should be fairly obvious that there's no way she's going to become president, or or maybe she would be a good candidate for vice president. But we all know who she is now.
Why should we assume that, though? I mean, the thing is the debate should be open to those who have thrown their hats into the ring. Now, the other question I have is that, we hear all these big tech voices all of a sudden, and like I said, I'm real upset that the prerogatives for, managing the debates has gone back to the DNC.
Well, who else is going to do it?
Well, here's the thing. If
you want the Heritage Foundation managing the debates?
No, it's a public debate. Why are we not just, it's like we should have debates every other day. I mean, I can get all kinds of info on YouTube.
No, I'm with you on that.
I'm not utilizing that.
Yeah, I'm not so concerned about the DNC running the debates. What concerns me is that corporate for-profit media, with no obligation, since Reagan did away with the fairness doctrine, no obligation to the truth or to news, are moderating these things. I want to see the League of Women Voters moderating the debates like they did back in the day. And
see whether or not Tulsi is really.
I don't think this this is not about Tulsi. This is about the larger process. Anyhow, we'll be right back. It's 10 minutes before the hour. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Jude in Birmingham, Alabama. Hey, Jude, what's on your mind?
Hi. I don't see how anyone who of the Christian faith could vote for Donald Trump after he said he was the chosen one. If you understand what that means, it's just insane.
Well, he said, I'm the chosen one to negotiate with China.
Sir, but he looked up to heaven. He looked away from the reporters.
I know, and he pointed his finger at the sky. I get it. It was a shout out to the wackadoodles in the.
It's mocking the Christian faith totally.
That's interesting. I hadn't seen it as a mock. I saw it as he was trying to say to his evangelical followers who think that he's going to bring about that final war of Armageddon in Israel that will bring about the return of Jesus, that he was saying to them, I'm your guy, and see, I mean, there's this whole well, hang on just a second. Let me just lay this out for you, Jude. There's this whole narrative out there that he is the King Cyrus, and
that doesn't work for this, because the chosen one is Jesus.
But see, King Cyrus was chosen by God to be the leader of, I think it was Persia, Iran at the time, and he helped the Jews out. And I think, and that narrative is huge right now. If you listen to, just turn across your AM radio dial until you find one of these Christian radio stations and listen to one of these preachers for a half hour or so. And typically they do get into politics, and they talk about how Donald Trump is King Cyrus. Donald Trump is the guy who is not really a Christian. And, he's got 3 wives, and he does terrible things to women, and, he's a flawed human being, just like King Cyrus was. But God sent him to save us, not to save him, to save us. And that's the narrative that is being promoted right now on the Christian right, among evangelicals. That's the narrative that Jerry Falwell Jr. is promoting, if not explicitly, at least implicitly. Ditto for Billy Graham's son, Franklin Graham, and a whole bunch of the hard right, or the fundamentalist evangelicals are openly promoting this, Jude.
I understand all that, sir, but I'm just telling you what I know of the Bible and in the Christian faith. And I'm telling you that what he did was he was mocking the Christian faith when he did that.
Yeah, I agree. I think he's mocking the Christian faith in everything that he's doing. This man, he doesn't know what Matthew 25 is. He's never read Matthew 7. He doesn't understand the core principles, the essential principles of Christianity or Judaism for that matter. He just knows himself. He's all about himself. I get that. Jude, thanks a lot for the call. Zach in Las Vegas. Hey, Zach, what's up?
I just had a question. I'm pretty young. I'm 32, and I work for a huge tech company. Let's call it Banana. They hire a particular set of people to work in their stores. Generally, 18 to 25, 30, and I can't seem to find too many of them that are interested in politics in general. I mean. You look around, you can see all the signs. It's a collapsing empire that we live in. The republic is losing its vitality. It's losing its oxygen. And my question is, how do you find the integrity to continue to go forward in the face of such despair?
The economy has been hollowed out by neoliberal economics that were put into place by Ronald Reagan in 1981 and have been maintained by, through 3 Republican administrations, maybe 4. Four Republican administrations and 2 Democratic administrations. And I think that, A, it is crashing the system. And your story, the despair that you're experiencing, the horrors in the workplace that you're experiencing are widespread. And I think this is one of the reasons why Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, between the two of them, have a larger percentage of Democratic primary voters than any other candidate, including Joe Biden, is that people want to see fundamental, structural change in our economy, genuine progressive change. And typically, that kind of change comes about as a result of an economic disaster. It did in 1929. We saw that kind of change after the Great Depression. I think that the economic disaster that you are experiencing and that is creeping across our landscape for 40 years, enough people are realizing how terrible this economy is, this neoliberal economy, that they are. We have finally reached that tipping point that only took 2 years between 1930 and 1932, in the election of 32, when FDR won in a landslide. The Democrats took the House and the Senate and controlled the House basically right up until the 1970s. That happened really fast because it was really hard and it was really deep, the Great Depression. This one has been happening more slowly. And people are slowly waking up. And as people enter the job market, they're like, holy cow, what happened to a decent job? What happened to a decent paycheck? What happened to job security? What happened to benefits like health insurance? As that is happening, people are waking up. And I tell you, Zach, I am convinced that in the next I am convinced that A, we're going to see a Democratic president, and I believe a Democratic Congress, and B, that we're going to see major structural change as a result of that. Now, I realize that the billionaires are going to be fighting this tooth and nail, and they're going to have a bunch of Democrats enlisted in their aid, and we're going to be talking about that right after the break, in fact. But I really think this is happening, Zach, and this is a problem that's not solved at the level of your employer. This is a problem that is solved at the level of the federal government. So if you want to do something about it, get involved with the local Democratic Party, push them to the left, and help get Democrats elected.
Yeah, I mean, I am quite involved. I don't know. I feel on some level that it seems to me that trying to get other people my age politically active, politically engaged, is such a tall mountain to climb, because they've been told their whole lives the only obligation of citizenry is to shop, is to be a consumer.
Right, but just ask them a simple question. Do you have student debt? That's crazy. No other developed country in the world has student debt. Why do we have student debt? It's because of our political system. And we need to, specifically our politicians, who are owned by the big banks. And we need to change that. I mean, just hit them at where they live. Zach, thanks for the call.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
We say fight back!
every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell the list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com and you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from the Undercommons, Fugitive. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Cokeland, The Secret History of Coke Industries and Corporate Power in America by Christopher Leonard. This is from the preface. On May 18th, 1981, 4 Wall Street bankers traveled to Wichita, Kansas. They went there to make an offer to Charles Koch, the CEO of an obscure mid-size energy company. The bankers from Morgan Stanley wanted to convince Koch to take his family's company public, offering shares for sale on the New York Stock Exchange. Their deal was squarely in line with the conventional wisdom of corporate America at the time. Going public was seen as a natural progression for companies like Koch Industries, offering them access to big pools of money and promising enormous paydays for the existing team of executives. All it required from the CEO was to surrender control. Morgan Stanley, in return, would collect a small fortune in fees. Charles Koch was 45 years old. He had run Koch Industries since he was 32 when his father died suddenly. He was trim, tall, and had an athlete's build. He spoke quietly in meetings and seemed almost passive. The bankers laid out their plan to take Koch public. They revealed what, to most executives at least, might have been the most significant detail. If Charles Koch agreed to the deal, he could earn $20 million overnight. The bankers seemed incredulous when they prepared a confidential memo about Koch's reaction. He does not want this cash, the memo reported. Charles Koch calmly explained to them why their offer made no sense. His company was breathtakingly profitable. It operated in vital, deeply complex corners of the American energy industry. During the 1980s, Koch Industries was the largest purchaser and transporter of U.S. crude oil. It owned an oil refinery. It employed teams of commodity traders who bought and sold a wildly diverse menu of raw materials and financial products, from gasoline to paper futures contracts. This might have encouraged most CEOs to take their company public. Koch Industries, however, did not want outsiders to know how much money its traders were earning. Taking the company public would expose too many of its secrets. The memo said, certain of Koch's commodity traders are particularly worried that their high salaries, once disclosed to the public, would be used against them by their trading partners. Secrecy was a strategic necessity for Koch Industries. Charles Koch did not want to surrender it. He also didn't want to surrender control. He had a specific, clear vision of how to run his company, and he didn't need Wall Street investors to interfere. If the bankers expected Charles Koch to go along with the conventional wisdom of their time, then they, like so many outsiders, did not understand him. Beneath his low-key veneer, Charles Koch was, at his core, a fighter. He had unmovable ideas about how things should be, and he did not back down when challenged. When he was challenged by his own brothers for control of Koch Industries, he fought them in a bitter legal battle that lasted decades. When he was challenged by members of a powerful labor union during his first years as CEO, he fought them even as they committed an act of industrial sabotage that nearly destroyed Koch's oil refinery. When the FBI and the U.S. Department of Justice launched a criminal investigation into Koch Industries' oil gathering business, Charles Koch fought them with every legal and political tool at his disposal. When a liberal Congress and President Barack Obama sought to impose regulations on the fossil fuel industry to control greenhouse gas emissions, Charles Koch fought them in ways that changed U.S. politics. In each of these fights, Charles Koch prevailed. When Charles Koch dismissed the bankers in 1981, it was just a small skirmish in the larger war to control Koch Industries. After prevailing in that fight, he created a company that was true to his vision. He avoided the snares that entangled many publicly traded companies that report their financial results to investors every 3 months. Koch Industries didn't have to think quarter to quarter. The company thinks year to year. An internal think tank and deal-making committee called the Development Group will sometimes think through a business deal on a timeline measured in decades. This long-term view made Koch more nimble where other companies stumbled. In 2003, for example, Koch Industries bought a group of money-losing fertilizer plants when no publicly traded company was willing to take the risk. Today, those plants are as profitable as a broken ATM machine that spews out cash around the clock. Unlike publicly traded companies, Koch Industries does not pay out rich dividends to investors. Charles Koch insists on reinvesting at least 90% of the company's profits, fueling its constant expansion. This strategy laid the foundation for decades of continuous growth. Koch Industries expanded continuously by purchasing other companies and branching out into new industries. It specialized in the kind of businesses that are indispensable to modern civilization, but which most consumers never directly encounter. The company is embedded in the hidden infrastructure of everyday life. Millions of people use Koch's products without ever seeing Koch's name attached. Koch refines and distributes fossil fuels, from gasoline to jet fuel, on which the global economy is dependent. Koch is the world's third largest producer of nitrogen fertilizer, which is the cornerstone of our modern food system. Koch makes the synthetic materials used in baby diapers, waistbands, and carpets. It makes the chemicals used for plastic bottles and pipes. It owns Georgia Pacific, which makes the wall panels, beams, and plywood required to build homes and office buildings. It makes napkins, paper towels, stationery, newspaper, and personal hygiene products. Koch Industries owns a network of commodities trading offices in Houston, Moscow, Geneva, and elsewhere, which are the circulatory system of modern finance. The book, Kochland, by Christopher Leonard.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Monday of this week, right? The start of the week. Women's Equality Day. 6 Democratic women in Colorado running for the Senate, all of them elected officials, state senators, state representatives, wrote a letter to the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee saying, please rescind your endorsement of Hickenlooper, that we need a real progressive in the Senate. Progressives are really moving forward. I mentioned in the previous hour, somebody called in and said, well, you know, if you're going to have somebody who's running in a Democratic primary on your show, because I had mentioned that I was, he was like, well, you know, where is the circular firing squad? Where does it begin and end? And because I have repeatedly said on this show, I'm not all about the circular firing squad, and I typically don't involve myself in primaries. But as I mentioned to that caller, I said, you know, I've got a congressman here in Oregon, and you know, I used to live in his district. I don't now, but you know, he was my congressman for years, and he co-sponsored a bill saying that it was illegal for states to allow GMO warning labels. In favor of a bill to grant liquid natural gas permits rapidly, you know, no delays there. This is like, you know, doing the bidding of the fossil fuel industry. Legislation that would have thrown more people in prison for longer periods of time. The mass incarceration problem. Require ICE to be alerted on certain things. The only Oregon Democrat to support this piece it's called the Resilient Forests Act, which actually isn't about resilient forests, which would sidestep public oversight and all this kind of stuff. His name is Kurt Schrader, and Mark Gamba is the mayor of Milwaukee, Oregon, which is a town that's basically suburban Portland. And he's formerly a professional photographer. He used to work for the
National Geographic.
National Geographic, yeah, thank you.
Sure.
And a member of the Democratic State Central Committee, and you know, worked your way up on the town city council and then mayor. And he's going to be running in the primary against Kurt Schrader, our sitting congressman, who, in my opinion, is not doing a good job. Mark, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
Glad to have you with us. Your city, I just want to get some of the stuff out here. Your city has, under your leadership, and this is a city of 21,000 people, and am I accurately characterizing it as kind of suburban Portland?
Yeah, it's
close
the
enough anyway.
First city south of Portland, served by the Orange Line. So
there you go. Okay, so you guys have banned single-use plastic bags along with polystyrene foam at restaurants. You've established a $15 an hour minimum wage for all city employees, which is basically all you can control. You've upped your investments in affordable housing. You've got you've got more green spaces, more biking infrastructure. Last year, you became the first city to use a 1% construction excise to fund affordable housing. You've adopted several ambitious plans, including the Climate Action Plan to make Milwaukee a carbon neutral city by 2050. The Urban Forest Management Plan, 40% tree canopy in your city by 2040. Housing affordability strategy aimed at boosting the construction of and access to affordable housing. All kinds of cool stuff. Mark Gamba, tell us what your vision is for being a member of the House of Representatives. How does this translate from being the mayor of Milwaukee to being U.S. Congressman?
Well, we have so many things in this country that we're failing to address, right? We've got, this is the richest nation on earth, and yet a huge portion of our population is not served by, they don't get health care at all. We have more of our citizens incarcerated than any other country in the world. We have, broken infrastructure and underfunded schools, and you kind of can go on and on and on. And we haven't done a damn thing about the greatest existential threat that's faced our species ever, which is climate change. So my question to people who sort of, like your caller that asked that question, is like, why would we continue to send the same corporate sellouts back year after year to continue to fail to solve the problems that we've had for decades?
Yeah,
and
that's a good question.
I've proven in a city that was when I moved to Milwaukee, it was a blue-collar town, it was a conservative town, and with good leadership, good things can happen. And I think there's kind of this misnomer that there's this red-blue divide, and people are so very different. But if you sit down at a kitchen table with most people care about the same things. They care about their kids. They care about the health, their health care. They care about keeping a roof over their head. They worry about, is the car going to break down? All of that other stuff is kind of noise, but we get pulled in those directions, and I think very specifically by the corporate media, by the corporate infrastructure that is causing us to be divided as a people, so that we don't pay attention to what's actually happening to us, which is that the 1%, or whatever you want to call them, are slowly over decades making the middle class poor, making the poor homeless. Day over day, we have more homeless people on the street, and that's not an accident. If we don't start to address those things in a very realistic way, it's going to be an ugly place to live. And, in 100 years, none will matter if we don't deal with climate change. So I find mayors to be practical people. I work with the other 20, whatever we are now, 24, 25 mayors in the metro region, and 9 times out of 10, we agree on virtually everything. There's a few things that we disagree on.
Republicans and Democrats?
Republicans and Democrats. You'd be surprised. It's a pretty even split in this Portland metro region.
Right.
Because they're practical people. They have to deal with everyday practical problems, and none of them are sold out to the corporations, right? Nobody's writing fat checks to, the mayor of Gresham or the mayor of Oregon City. They're just doing the best job they think they can do for their city. And so I think if we have more people in Congress doing exactly that, the best job they can for their district, for their state, and frankly for the country, we could actually see a positive change in this country, and we could start to see it begin to coalesce again. I mean, it's heartbreaking how broken we are, and it's 95% artificial.
Yeah, and we were talking the other day, and you were telling me the story of how you figured out that having universal health care, having a health care plan for that covers everybody in the country was a good thing. You had an experience in Mexico compared to an experience you had here in the United States. You want to tell us about that?
Yeah, so I was on assignment down in southern Mexico, real close to the Belizean border, in the jungle, way out. It was a 2-hour Jeep drive and then hiking through the jungle. And I got bit by fire ants. And fire ants do this interesting thing where a lot of them crawl up on you and then they bite. So when you get bit by fire ants, you are bit.
So they all bite at once. This is how they kill animals.
Yeah. So turns out I'm allergic to fire ants. Who knew? So I started puffing up, and I was like, great. So I hike back to the Jeep, drive back to the tiny little village, that little clinic. Walk in, young woman doctor. She looks at me. She goes, "Yep, fire ants. Yep, you're allergic." Sends a guy across the street to the pharmacia. He buys a couple vials of this stuff. She gives me an injection. 3 hours later, I'm golden. She gives me the second one. Says, "Take that with you in case you're ever bit again." And that's the only thing she charged me for. She didn't charge me for any of her time
And this is because Mexico. This was in Mexico because Mexico has a national healthcare system.
Universal
Everybody's
healthcare.
covered.
Everybody's
in
covered.
Mexico. And so then you come to the United States.
So 4 years later, I'm shooting in Atlanta, Georgia, and I get bit by fire ants again. Go into the hospital, nice big fancy hospital. I spend several hours in the waiting room, another 45 minutes in the room that I'm supposed to be treated in. Finally, a doctor comes in. Again, coincidentally, a young woman. She looks at me. She goes, "Yep, fire ants. Yep, you're allergic." She disappears for a while. She comes back. I'm like, seriously, all I need is to be injected with this stuff. And I've been carrying it for 4 years. And she takes it out of my hand. She looks at it and she goes, "Yeah, that hasn't been approved by the FDA." She throws it in the trash. She gives me an injection of steroids. I'm still puffed up 6 days later. I can breathe, but I'm still... and that cost me $3,000. And I had insurance.
Because you had, what, a $5,000 deductible?
Exactly.
That's pretty much normal. That's insane. And it's just incredible. So what specifically, if you were in Congress right now, which of the healthcare plans would you be promoting?
I think I love Bernie, and I think his plan's good. I think Jayapal from Washington has actually notched it up a little bit. Her bill is actually, it takes place faster. It covers more things. It sort of solves a lot of the details that people tend to go on and on about. So if we were voting on it tomorrow, I'd be voting for her bill straight up.
Pramila Jayapal's.
Yeah, and I think people freak out. They're like, "Oh, you're going to raise my taxes." I mean, yeah, your taxes are going to go up. Your taxes are going to go up. There you go, and you will pay no co-pays and no insurance payments every month, and your drugs are going to go way down. So in actuality, you're already paying for it.
Right.
You're paying more than anybody else in the world, frankly.
Right. You're going to be routing that money through the government with a 2% overhead rather than routing it through a for-profit insurance company with a 20% overhead.
Or 30.
Yeah. Well, I think Obamacare by law
dropped it down a little
25%. Bit. Yeah. But that's what's going on. There's a lot of fascinating issues. I also we're talking with Mark Gamba. He's running for in the primary for the 5th Congressional District here in Oregon. And in the Democratic primary, he's the mayor of Milwaukee, Oregon, and a member of the State Central Committee in the Democratic Party, worked your way up through the Democratic Party. I want to talk about that in just a moment, if you can stick around. Mark Gamba is with us. The website, markgamba.com. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And Mark's Twitter handle is Mark_Gamba. Welcome back. And we're talking with Mark Gamba from the mayor of Milwaukee. Mark, before I want to get into the state politics stuff when we come out of this break. Right now, we're just with our nonprofit stations and Free Speech TV. And so, what provoked you to get into politics in the first place?
Climate change. So as a photographer traveling around the world, I was seeing the changes occur. And I had read the science years ago. I think the first time I read about it was back when Al Gore was a junior senator. And I had a pretty good sense of what scientists predicted it would look like. And I was already starting to see changes. The coral reefs were starting to bleach. I'd go on an assignment into Glacier Bay, and the guide that I'm with would say, well, this glacier used to be here, and then we'd paddle for another hour to the face of the glacier. And I'm like, is it some kind of cycle that goes back and forth? He goes, well, yeah, there's a cycle that goes back and forth, but this is way past that. This is melting glaciers. And people go, who cares melting glaciers? Who cares polar bears? Well, glaciers for a lot of this country is where we get our water in the summer.
For a lot of the world. I mean, this is the glaciers what's the mountain range in Tibet and through China and India?
The Himalayas.
The Himalayas. Thank you. It's feeding the Ganges. You've got in the Andes feeding the rivers in South America.
That's right. That's right. Most people will suffer greatly just on water shortages alone if this continues. And there's the 100 other things. People talk all the time about sea level rise, and that's a big deal because we're going to lose a lot of very high-end real estate pretty quickly. But I actually think the thing that people are going to care more about is the levels of starvation that are going to go up. Because if you think about it, the average farmer has some sense of, if I plant this crop at this time of the year, I will yield roughly this amount of food by the time I harvest, right? If you don't know from year to year if you have torrential rainstorms or you're going to have a complete drought, right? You don't know whether there's going to be an ice storm in April or no rain whatsoever starting in January. What the heck do you plant, and what's going to survive? And as the weather becomes more and more extreme, we saw it already. The Midwest was underwater for half the year. As the weather becomes more and more extreme, more and more unpredictable, the place where most people are going to feel that, I think the fastest, is that the price of food is going to go up because it is just going to be harder and harder to grow food.
Over the short term, it looks like it's probably going to go down in the United States because we can't sell stuff to China right now because of Trump's incoherent
we need to eat a lot of GMO soybeans then.
Yeah, exactly. Remarkable stuff. So climate change is on your scale of what's important and what's not. Climate change is at the top of the list.
It's number one. 100 years from now, if we don't get that one right, none of the rest of it's going to matter.
Yeah.
But when you are a mayor, all of these other things you're confronted with, right? Because you run into little old ladies that are losing their home because the rent just went up 50% overnight. You meet people on the street that used to be doing really well and got in a car accident and their insurance stopped covering them at a certain point and now they're homeless. I mean, there's just story after story after story of people you meet.
It's got to be amazing.
We got to fix all this stuff.
We'll be right back. Mark Gamba is with us. Stick around. So we just put up a new video for our welcome back. We're talking with Mark Gamba. MarkGamba.com is the website. Mark's campaign, unlike the guy that you're running against, Kurt Schrader, who's taking corporate money and has several $1 million in the bank right now, you're funding your campaign exclusively with small dollar donations from individuals. Is that correct?
That's right, yeah. No corporate money at all, which is a little depressing. Every now and then I had a guy that owns a big solar installation company, and he's a fan of mine, and he's like, I'm going to write you a $5,000 check. I'm like, dude, I can't take it.
What is it, the limit, 2,700?
2,800.
2,800, yeah. Okay. Anyhow, we're talking with Mark Gamba. And Mark, you started in politics basically at the bottom. I mean, on the planning commission for the city of Milwaukee where you live, and then you moved to city council, I believe, and then you ran for mayor, and now you're running for Congress. Tell me how this works. In fact, tell all of our listeners how this works. If you're listening, if somebody's listening to this program right now, and they're thinking, the politics in my town really suck, or in my county, or in my state, but in particular in my town, because this is the farm team, right? The people who run for Congress typically start out at the local level. This is how you learn
You hope
politics.
they do.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, not many of them have.
I'd like to see more of that. Yeah. So you were at the time making a living as a photographer for National Geographic, and you decided to get into politics. And what do? Where do you show up? How do you present yourself? Who do you talk to? Where does somebody start?
Well, it's interesting. In a small town, it's a little bit different than Portland. If you want to run for city council in Portland, you've got a tough row to hoe. But in the smaller towns, if you can gather a group of like-minded people, a couple hundred like-minded people, it is not that hard to get elected to city council. And most people, frankly, don't care. They're not paying attention. It was funny, when I was first knocking doors, running for city council the very first time, the single most common response was, "Oh, we have a city council?"
Really?
Yeah, because they're not used to seeing news about the Milwaukee City Council. The newspaper they're reading, it's all about the Portland City Council. It's really, frankly, not that hard to run. I was actually the director of photography on a feature film while I was running for city council the first time. So I'm sure you have a sense of what that's like, 16 hours a day, 6 days a week.
Sure.
And I was running for city council and still won by, I don't remember what it was, 6 or 8 points against a lawyer who had grown up in the city, grown up in Milwaukee. It's just because I had a couple hundred people that were excited by what I was doing. I had started this environmental group like 3 or 4 years before, to just kind of try and pressure the city council to do positive things.
Is this group MUST?
MUST, yeah.
What's the acronym?
Milwaukee Understands Sustainable Transition. We were just trying to come up with something.
So you were trying to deal with climate change. I mean, this is the thing. As a photographer, you got out there, you saw the glaciers melting, you freaked out, and you said, okay, or not freaked out, but you came back and you said, okay, this is the number one most existential issue of our day is climate change, and I'm going to run for political office to do something about it.
Yeah, pretty much.
And boom, on the planning commission, and then on the city council, and then the mayor, and now you're trying to get into Congress.
Yeah. So what that group actually did, we spent a lot of time testifying before the city council and didn't get a lot of movement, but we noticed that all the committees and commissions that are assigned various tasks throughout the city, they would listen, and whatever they said, they would be like, good, we're good, let's do that. So we're like, well, let's get people on all those committees and commissions, and that's what we did. So I got on the planning commission, another one got on the planning commission, and we got somebody on virtually every committee and commission in the city. And just having that voice in the room, that voice of, have we thought about this? Should we be considering this? And a lot of people hadn't. And that really just started to shift the whole dynamic of the city, just that. And then I ran for council 2.5 years later, or whatever it was, and
that was
stopped.
2012, right? Thereabouts.
That sounds right.
Yeah. So if somebody, I tell people, just show up at your local Democratic Party, and just say, hey, I'd like to be here. I'd like to be part of this. I'd like to become a precinct committee person, for example. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, well, the PCPs are sort of the unsung heroes of the Democratic Party. I mean, the races that we've won in many places, many races, to a large part are due to somebody meeting somebody at the door and having a conversation. Yeah. I mean, that's not a usual experience for a lot of people.
Yeah, so we've got to wrap this up. I'm sorry.
Sure.
Mark Gamba is the guy. He's going to be running for the 5th, or he's running in the primary here in Oregon. For the 5th Congressional District against Representative Kurt Schrader. His website, markgamba.com, and his Twitter handle is Mark_Gamba. Mark, thanks a lot for dropping by.
Thank you very much. It was great.
Great talking to you.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
That is, once again, Mark Gamba, MarkGamba.com, and the Twitter handle is Mark_Gamba. We'll be right back. Our book today is How to Get Rid of a President by David Preece. And this is from the chapter Rejected by the Party, starting on page 12, kind of mid-chapter. Presidents need not be thrown out at the polls on Election Day to find themselves dislodged from the White House. History shows us that a chief executive's own political allies can remove that incumbent when they perceive him as unpopular or unfit. refusing to nominate a president for a second term, or better yet, getting the incumbent to realize that he should walk away before it becomes an embarrassing vote at the convention, does bring the party significant pain. But many politicians have calculated that discarding their own party's toxic president by internal action is better than waiting for the voters to do it. This dynamic remained absent for the first half century or so of American politics. George Washington, who didn't represent any formal party, set a precedent by stepping away from re-election after 2 terms. Successor after successor followed suit, keeping the support of their parties until they left office after 8 years. Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, and Jackson lost the next election, both Adamses and Van Buren, or met the Grim Reaper, Harrison. John Tyler, if only in this one respect, was a trendsetter. He began a 6-president cascade of men who failed to appear on their party's ballot in the general election after their first term. One, Zachary Taylor, literally had no choice. Like Harrison, he died in office. The others, by staying alive through their 4-year terms, could have carried their party's banners again on Election Day. Not one did, as national agonizing over slavery and other tensions within each of the major parties made it difficult for any president to build and sustain a governing coalition. Of those 5 chief executives, only James Polk left with a solid reputation and a ledger of successes. He'd told Democrats upon his nomination in 1844, "I shall enter upon the discharge of the high and solemn duties of the office with the settled purpose of not being a candidate for re-election." And he stayed true to his word. It was just as well, only 3 months after what would have been his second inauguration, he died at the age of 53. The 3 presidents who followed Polk, the forgettable series of Millard Fillmore, Franklin Pierce, and James Buchanan, shared 3 characteristics. First, historians routinely rank them among the nation's worst presidents. Second, and related to that, they took no responsibility for resolving the national moral failure of slavery. And third, no matter how they had attained office, they, like future presidents Chester Arthur and Lyndon Johnson, found themselves spurned by their own parties. The Whigs had learned in 1840 that a celebrity candidate seemed to have an easier route into the White House than a party regular. So in 1848, they nominated General Zachary Taylor, a recent hero of battlefields in the Mexican-American War. Despite his lack of solid political principles or any apparent passion for the job, just 2 years earlier he'd said with apparent sincerity, "I am not and never shall be an aspirant for that honor," Taylor won the election over Democratic candidate Lewis Cass. In July 1850, he became the second straight Whig general to president who couldn't make it to the next election alive. Vice President Millard Fillmore took his place. Fillmore had risen to prominence in New York's anti-Mason party dedicated to exposing and opposing Freemason fraternal organizations, but switched allegiance to the Whigs in the 1830s. In the first year and a half of the administration, inter-party rivals had manipulated Taylor better than Fillmore did, leaving him little to do but preside over the Senate and stew over his fate in a useless job. But as president, he was prepared to avenge perceived slights. Ahead of their expected dismissal, all the cabinet members whom Fillard had inherited from Taylor offered their resignations, which were quickly accepted by the new president. He asked them to remain in place for 1 month. They agreed to stay for 1 week. Fillmore would proceed to fire more previous political appointees than any of his successors had. More than half of those at the State Department, for example, had to find new jobs. The biggest development during Fillmore's presidency was the Compromise of 1850. This set of bills admitted California to the Union as a free state, allowed the organization of the Utah and New Mexico Territory without reference to slavery, resolved both the Texas state boundary and the Lone Star State's remaining debt, abolished the slave trade in the District of Columbia, and reaffirmed the fugitive slave law that required the returning of slaves escaped across state lines. Fillmore signed each bill, believing this package of measures had fixed what he considered an annoying issue that kept getting in the way of his other priorities. The compromise bills delayed a war between the states, but at a cost. They not only perpetuated slavery, but split the Whigs further apart, as most Northerners refused to abide by the fugitive slave law. Congressional elections in November 1850 increased the Democratic opposition's majorities in both the House and the Senate. The rest of the president's term was so bad that the highlight might have been the start of Commodore Matthew Perry's voyage to Japan to open that country to American trade, even though he didn't arrive until Fillmore left office. Not long after rising to become the chief executive, Fillmore declared he wouldn't run again in the 1852 election. He reiterated that in 1851. But the trappings of presidential power and the pleas of his remaining party faithful convinced him to retract that pledge and make a late entry into the field of candidates. He portrayed his about-face as a noble personal sacrifice for the good of the party and the country. And during the spring of that election year, 8 Whig state conventions endorsed him. As delegates gathered for what a leading historian of the era calls the longest, most rancorous, and most debilitating Whig national convention ever to meet, the first tally had Fillmore in the lead. How to get rid of a president.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. 34 minutes past the hour. Thom Hartmann here with you. Yesterday, I told you all about how the Koch-backed effort, as in Koch brothers-backed effort to ban light rail in the least sustainable city in the United States, Phoenix, Arizona, was on the ballot. And this was, put on there by a guy who worked for a Koch-funded organization, and it basically said there will be no expansion of light rail in Phoenix. We don't want mass transit, and in fact, we're going to ban into the future forever any expansion of the light rail system in Phoenix. And that was on the ballot, and the voters showed up, and they said, no, we're not voting for something stupid like that. Are you kidding? The Koch brothers, obviously they don't need light rail, but we do. So I thought that was fascinating. Anyhow, Alex in Edison, New Jersey. Hey, Alex, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I'd like to kind of disagree with you about something.
Sure.
You seem to like the idea of Bernie Sanders allowing unions and maybe other groups to keep their existing health insurance?
Yes, I think it's, I don't think any of them are going to keep their existing health insurance for more than a year or two until they figure out what's going on and how much it costs. And B, it eliminates the ability of corporate Democrats and Republicans to say to union members in particular, but more because they tend to have better health care plans because they negotiate them, to say to people with good health insurance plans, he wants to take away your health insurance. And now he can say, no, you can keep your health insurance if you want, but everybody else is going to get something better than you've got, and you're always going to be eligible for it. I think politically that's dynamite.
So I agree with your political point, but as a practical matter, don't you suppose then the industry will pluck the healthy workers from the workforce and then let the government, or the sucker taxpayer in this case, pay for all the sick people? That's my question.
When a company or a union buys a group plan, everybody's in or everybody's out. The company doesn't have the insurance company doesn't have the choice of doing that. And also, when the insurance pool shrinks, which it'll do, once everybody else is covered by Medicare, the insurance pool that is being insured by these private for-profit insurers is going to shrink, which is going to raise their costs. And so their insurance rates are going to go up even more, and they're going to get more unaffordable really quickly. So this is how you kill off private health insurance without banning it legally. And practically speaking, if you can't get this done politically, it doesn't get done. So it doesn't matter how the health insurance companies respond. If you don't pass something that gets, everybody in the country has access to Medicare, then you got nothing anyway. So that's my take on it. Alex, thanks for the call. Zach, people are always welcome to disagree with me. Zach in North Hollywood. Hey, Zach, what's up?
Morning, Tom.
Hey.
Real quick, there's a line in our country, and the line is $250,000. If you make less, you'd care about democracy. If you make more, maybe not so much.
I'm not sure that's true.
Well, and then of course the top, they're all in for themselves. But the point I called about is this election coming up is a debate. It's an argument. And
every election is.
I want to believe that it's really not side to side. It's up and down. And the answer to wealth disparity is the middle and the bottom have to unite against the top. And the top is terrified that we're eventually going to figure that out.
Yeah.
And then their game is going to be over.
Yeah, no,
more
I agree.
gaming in the
They're using race to divide us. They're using class to divide us. They're using gender to divide us. They're using regionality, quote, culture to divide us. They're using abortion to divide us. They're using immigration to divide us. I mean, they are doing everything they can to keep us from talking about the fact that they're picking our pockets, and
It's
have
up
been
and
ever since
down,
Ronald
and
Reagan
we need
came
to
into office.
abolish Citizens United and abolish the e-college. Thanks, Tom.
Yeah, I'm with you. Thank you. Adam in New Springfield, Ohio. Hey, Adam, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah. You can get your mouth a little closer to the microphone. It'll be great.
Okay. Is that a little better?
Yeah. What's up?
All right. Thank you. I just wanted to know, you touched on it with the book that you were reading at the bottom of the hour on rhetoric and things like that. I was in radio for 17 years. You're still in radio. And I left college to do radio. I've lost that career because of, in part, the Telecommunications Reform Act of '96. And I don't know how much you can beat on it or what has to be done to try to show people that we need local. You talked about it with local newspapers. The local newspaper in Youngstown, Ohio, after 150 years, is shutting down.
Right.
The Youngstown Vindicator. And the Warren Tribune of the neighboring county has agreed to pick it back up and keep it running.
Yeah.
But the shrinking of local has been so depleted. And you spoke about Limbaugh, and I think that of the triad of power, wealth, and influence, and people who are obsessed or addicted to it, influence seems to be the lesser evil by presentation, but it's actually the worst. And I think Rupert Murdoch is probably exhibit A of this with what he has done. And it's interesting that Rupert Murdoch doesn't seem to have these problems of corporate mergers with, Comcast or Verizon or AT&T and some of these other huge corporate mergers that are happening. He stays solo, and there's a reason why, because he is addicted and obsessed with influence. And it's talking points that people are going out and shoving into other people's faces with every day while they're ignoring commonality. And you touch on it constantly. But what can actually be done to try to wake people up? Because I witnessed it by being in media.
Yeah, no, I see it too. And here in Oregon, for example, the Oregonian, the local newspaper, essentially went out of business. It got sold to a company in New York, and so now it's a little tabloid, and it's published by a company in New York, and basically the only editorials you see in it are local right wingers, and I'm wondering if they're pay for play editorials even. I don't know, but this is I know this is happening all over the country. I think people
and then they staff all the people that are there that are local.
Yeah, I think people are starting to wake up, and particularly when they see, people in the news going, well, it seems like a lot of people like the idea of free college, but is it practical? Can it win election? This kind of BS. Maybe people were buying this stuff 10 years ago. They're not buying it anymore. And Americans are waking up, Adam. They really seriously, genuinely waking up, and that's a good thing. Adam, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. And spot on about local media. It just got destroyed by the Telecommunications Act and by Reagan changing the whole basically enforcement of the Sherman Antitrust Act, the anti-monopoly laws. Gary in Chicago. Hey, Gary, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I wanted to hit you with a little saying here. Consistency cancels coincidence.
Okay. What are you talking about?
So, I'm talking about Anthony Kennedy leaving the Supreme Court.
You're talking. Okay. Is this the story that I did in the first hour, where it looks like possibly Donald Trump blackmailed Anthony Kennedy to leave the Supreme Court by threatening to expose that his son was involved in these skeezy real estate loans that are being co-signed by Russian billionaire oligarchs for the Trump company?
Exactly. Okay. You summarized it as a political move. It's not. It's a legal move. Okay? By controlling the Supreme Court, okay, and controlling the Justice Department by getting rid of Sessions and putting Barr in there, he now insulates himself against any repercussions legally.
Yeah, it's possible. It's entirely possible. And just like 5 U.S. senators wrote an amicus brief, front of the court brief, to the Supreme Court on this decision that's coming up on guns, and said, 5 of you were put on the court with money from the NRA. You should not be ruling on this issue. And, which is a pretty damn shocking thing to have happen. I think if this story is true, whether Trump did it implicitly or explicitly, threatened Kennedy with the revealing his son's involvement in Trump's crimes, basically the Trump crime family's crimes, then this is going to have legs, and this will lead to impeachment. This is serious stuff. Gary, thanks a lot for the call. Brian in Liberty, Nebraska. Hey, Brian, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I'm a little bit worried about if all of our dreams come true, and we get Medicare for all, and we get a Green New Deal and all this. What's to stop corporations from trying to scuttle it?
Oh, they're going to try and scuttle it before it's even born. They're doing that right now.
Of course, but if it gets enacted, I mean, it seems like they'll redouble their effort, and there'll be disruptions in supply chains. And
that's right. The way that we stop that is by repealing Citizens United and the Supreme Court decisions going back to 1976, the Buckley case, that led to Citizens United. And that could be done by Congress. I lay this out in my book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. It could be done by Congress. It really, more appropriately, should be done by constitutional amendment. And most of the Democratic candidates, even the ones who aren't, quote, progressives, are in favor of a constitutional amendment that will say corporations are not people and money is not speech. And most of America is in favor of this. We just haven't yet gotten enough of the members of Congress and the House and the Senate to go along with this, because so many of them are living off corporate money.
Okay, so that's a solution that works from within government, but
right.
I was a little bit concerned about just stuff that's going to be happening out on the street.
Well, what's happening on the street is that we have to change our government. We have to get out on the streets in terms of waking up our friends and neighbors, talking about these issues at work, sharing things with family, sharing them in social media. Just wake people up to these issues. This has got to be step one. Brian, thanks a lot for the call. Excuse me. Bob Ney will be up next with Talk Media News. Stick around. We'll be right back. It's 45 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program, the place where smart people get their news. Defending America from the weapons of mass deception.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Right after the break, Bob Ney, former Congressman Bob Ney, will be with us to fill us in on what's going on in the world today and give his particular insights on said news. And welcome back. Let's see here. Logan in Sonoma, California, watching on YouTube. Hey, Logan, what's up? Logan? No, Logan. Let's try Gary in Aden, Pennsylvania, watching Free Speech TV. Hey, Gary, what's on your mind today?
Hello, Portland, Oregon. Hello, Mr. Hartmann.
Hey, Gary.
Thank you. Two things. One, real quickly. Here's what I don't understand. Maybe you can help me with it. And then I want to end it with a quote from Lincoln that dovetails the liar in chief. What I don't understand here is, and I'd like to give some unsolicited advice to Joe Biden and his supporters, and that is and I don't hear it emphasized at all. And help me with this. They need to emphasize his foreign policy experience. He has far and away more experience in foreign policy, being the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee when he was in there as senator, than anybody in the field, let alone the liar-in-chief.
Yeah, you're right.
So somebody help me with this.
Yeah. Well, I don't know anybody on his campaign, and he has chosen not to come on our program. So I'm not the one who's. I mean, maybe he'll show up. We'll see. I'm not going to be the one who tells him.
Now, thank you. Can I close with a quote from Abraham Lincoln?
Certainly.
Good. Thank you. Lincoln said exactly this: nearly all men can stand adversity, but if you want to test a man's character, give him power.
Yeah, that's brilliant, and that's certainly what we're seeing right now.
Yes,
Thank you, Ricardo in Phoenix. Hey, Ricardo, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I'm a kind of a long-time listener. I've been listening for about 3 years now.
Thanks.
4 years, actually, now.
So what's on your mind?
So I want to talk about the ballot initiatives in Phoenix.
Mm-hmm.
And I was actually a field director on that campaign. There was actually multiple organizations, but I was a field director for one of the organizations. And one of the things that we kept hearing out there was a lot of misinformation. And most of those, well, I wouldn't say most, but a lot of people casted votes as yes, thinking that they were voting for the light rail.
Right.
And so those are the type of
but no one, right?
That happened. What was that?
No one, right?
Yeah, no one, exactly. Because we were out there every single day. I mean, we hit like 15K doors in 7 days. These last 7 days, just our organization.
Yeah, when these guys run these scam ballot initiatives, they typically make them very confusing.
Exactly, and that's something that we're trying to wake up voters to here, and it seems like it's working. We've done a lot of work here on the ground, and that's exactly what it takes, and that's what I want your listeners to know is that a lot of Democratic politics is, the listening to consultants about messaging and TV ads and things like that, but what really is going to bring out new voters is going to their door, talking to them, and giving them information before the election, talking to them before, getting them prepped for the election. So that's just something I want to leave with your with your viewers.
Well, good on you, Ricardo, for being part of the force. The group, the people who are out there doing that. Congratulations, and congratulations on a great victory yesterday in Phoenix. And thanks for watching us in Phoenix. We'll be right back with Congressman Bob Ney. Stick around. Every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell the list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com. And you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
So let's check in with Talk Media News with Bob Ney and find out what's going on in the world today. This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Loving What You Do, Alan Ratner's new book. Bob, welcome.
Well, thank you, Tom.
So what's up in the world?
Well, the Trump administration will not be releasing the peace plan that they have before Israel's elections. And Israel's elections, Tom, are, as you know, September the 17th, and it's been a pretty big battle for Prime Minister Netanyahu back and forth with a lot of problems that have occurred over there. But the big important part to it, I guess, why it matters is because the president has spoken twice about this issue in the last 2 weeks that we've covered it. He raised the possibility he was going to at least let some of it, be out there. But then we're told that he had a meeting with his Middle East peace team, which is headed by, of course, Jared Kushner, and several discussions were held, and they have decided to do nothing right now. Obviously, somebody gave a phone call to them somewhere, I would assume, since they've decided to not put it out there.
That's interesting.
Yeah, right. And I don't expect anything, actually, Tom, after the election anyway, because there has been no Palestinian involvement on this. They actually called Palestinian businessmen American Palestinians and actually considered that input into the peace plan. So there'll be nothing. Yes, they did that. Wow. There's no, like Saad Barakat and others that are over there, they've had no involvement with it. And then the president is going to fast-track the border wall, and I discovered in this story something I didn't know. Well, first of all, he's directing aides to fast-track the billions of dollars worth of construction. We know he did that. The one had the court test, of course, to it, where he was using Pentagon money. And now he's going to order and promise to complete 500 miles of the fence before the election because, this was his big deal, build the wall, of course.
But Mexico's not paying for it.
Yes, Mexico's not. Yeah. And what he will say is that, hey, I got it built because the Democratic side just wouldn't help me, and so I got it built, and we're going to pay for it later. We're going to take away.
We're going to bill Mexico later. Is that the deal?
Later.
We'll send him an invoice.
Like maybe after he's out of office, they'll find a way to pay for it.
Yeah.
But there's something here I did not know. There is an additional cost to this wall because the president is insistent that the border wall be painted black. Have you heard about this?
No.
He's delaying the entire process because he's insisting on painting it black, and that's driving up the costs. In fact, a single mile of the wall in California costs $1 million in painting costs. Right. And he thinks that the dark coat will mean that the wall will look too hot and too slippery to climb.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, so, I think people that are coming to the border, they talk to each other, and they realize that's black paint, and that's not actually going to... so I don't know if there's a paint contractor out there, but somebody's getting $1 million a mile for the painting for that. And then we're watching, of course, the Deutsche Bank and the tax returns of the president, which is an interesting battle because Congress clearly had the rights under an old law where at one point in time the president of the United States could look at anybody's tax returns, and due to some conflicts with the
Right, and Congress can now. So here's my question, Bob. Last night David K. Johnson on MSNBC was saying that Deutsche Bank has Trump's tax returns, and what they're showing is that most of, and maybe all of his loans since his last bankruptcies from Deutsche Bank have been co-signed by billionaire oligarchs, mostly in Russia, perhaps the United Arab Emirates, maybe even in Turkey. And so he's in the pocket of these foreign guys. And then there's also, at the inauguration, Trump walked up to Anthony Kennedy and said, hey, nice boy you've got there. There's speculation that Trump basically blackmailed Anthony Kennedy into leaving the Supreme Court by threatening, implicitly or explicitly, threatening to expose his son's participation in Trump's crimes, because his son, Justin Kennedy, was the head of the real estate division of Deutsche Bank, which was who was loaning all this money to Donald Trump. So he was signing off on these loans or participating in them. If this turns out to be the case, that Kennedy got basically, left the Supreme Court to avoid his son being embarrassed, so that Trump could get Brett Kavanaugh on, and that that Trump is owned by these foreign oligarchs and isn't a billionaire, isn't even necessarily a millionaire. He might be actually in debt. I mean, that would explain why he's so desperately fighting to not have anybody see his tax returns. Can you think of any other explanation? And if that comes out, how will the Republicans react?
Well, the Republicans will have a real problem. And, of course, if it comes out during the election and the seats that are up in the Senate will, look, it'll protect itself, Tom. I mean, I served with the Republican House and of course, the Senate. We knew how everybody functioned, and they will protect themselves if this type of thing comes out. I mean, there's always been the talk on the Hill of the vulnerability of President Trump, and it wasn't Mueller as much as, that caused some problems, but the vulnerability is New York State, the Trump business empire, the fact that two of his relatives, which is his daughter and son-in-law, are in the White House deciding policy, and on the other hand, are running the business, combined with these loans. And if somebody pursues that, I think they're going to have a hot button.
And Jared's taking $1 billion bucks. So how do the Republicans get Trump off the ticket? Is there a way?
Well, they won't. They'll just have to, fend for themselves the best they can, probably by attacking him.
Very, very interesting. Bob Ney, Talk Media News. Thank you, Bob. Great talking with you. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Cokeland, The Secret History of Coke Industries and Corporate Power in America by Christopher Leonard. This is from the preface. On May 18th, 1981, 4 Wall Street bankers traveled to Wichita, Kansas. They went there to make an offer to Charles Koch, the CEO of an obscure mid-size energy company. The bankers from Morgan Stanley wanted to convince Koch to take his family's company public, offering shares for sale on the New York Stock Exchange. Their deal was squarely in line with the conventional wisdom of corporate America at the time. Going public was seen as a natural progression for companies like Koch Industries, offering them access to big pools of money and promising enormous paydays for the existing team of executives. All it required from the CEO was to surrender control. Morgan Stanley, in return, would collect a small fortune in fees. Charles Koch was 45 years old. He had run Koch Industries since he was 32 when his father died suddenly. He was trim, tall, and had an athlete's build. He spoke quietly in meetings and seemed almost passive. The bankers laid out their plan to take Koch public. They revealed what, to most executives at least, might have been the most significant detail. If Charles Koch agreed to the deal, he could earn $20 million overnight. The bankers seemed incredulous when they prepared a confidential memo about Koch's reaction. He does not want this cash, the memo reported. Charles Koch calmly explained to them why their offer made no sense. His company was breathtakingly profitable. It operated in vital, deeply complex corners of the American energy industry. During the 1980s, Koch Industries was the largest purchaser and transporter of U.S. crude oil. It owned an oil refinery. It employed teams of commodity traders who bought and sold a wildly diverse menu of raw materials and financial products, from gasoline to paper futures contracts. This might have encouraged most CEOs to take their company public. Koch Industries, however, did not want outsiders to know how much money its traders were earning. Taking the company public would expose too many of its secrets. The memo said, certain of Koch's commodity traders are particularly worried that their high salaries, once disclosed to the public, would be used against them by their trading partners. Secrecy was a strategic necessity for Koch Industries. Charles Koch did not want to surrender it. He also didn't want to surrender control. He had a specific, clear vision of how to run his company, and he didn't need Wall Street investors to interfere. If the bankers expected Charles Koch to go along with the conventional wisdom of their time, then they, like so many outsiders, did not understand him. Beneath his low-key veneer, Charles Koch was, at his core, a fighter. He had unmovable ideas about how things should be, and he did not back down when challenged. When he was challenged by his own brothers for control of Koch Industries, he fought them in a bitter legal battle that lasted decades. When he was challenged by members of a powerful labor union during his first years as CEO, he fought them even as they committed an act of industrial sabotage that nearly destroyed Koch's oil refinery. When the FBI and the U.S. Department of Justice launched a criminal investigation into Koch Industries' oil gathering business, Charles Koch fought them with every legal and political tool at his disposal. When a liberal Congress and President Barack Obama sought to impose regulations on the fossil fuel industry to control greenhouse gas emissions, Charles Koch fought them in ways that changed U.S. politics. In each of these fights, Charles Koch prevailed. When Charles Koch dismissed the bankers in 1981, it was just a small skirmish in the larger war to control Koch Industries. After prevailing in that fight, he created a company that was true to his vision. He avoided the snares that entangled many publicly traded companies that report their financial results to investors every 3 months. Koch Industries didn't have to think quarter to quarter. The company thinks year to year. An internal think tank and deal-making committee called the Development Group will sometimes think through a business deal on a timeline measured in decades. This long-term view made Koch more nimble where other companies stumbled. In 2003, for example, Koch Industries bought a group of money-losing fertilizer plants when no publicly traded company was willing to take the risk. Today, those plants are as profitable as a broken ATM machine that spews out cash around the clock. Unlike publicly traded companies, Koch Industries does not pay out rich dividends to investors. Charles Koch insists on reinvesting at least 90% of the company's profits, fueling its constant expansion. This strategy laid the foundation for decades of continuous growth. Koch Industries expanded continuously by purchasing other companies and branching out into new industries. It specialized in the kind of businesses that are indispensable to modern civilization, but which most consumers never directly encounter. The company is embedded in the hidden infrastructure of everyday life. Millions of people use Coke's products without ever seeing Coke's name attached. Coke refines and distributes fossil fuels, from gasoline to jet fuel, on which the global economy is dependent. Coke is the world's third largest producer of nitrogen fertilizer, which is the cornerstone of our modern food system. Coke makes the synthetic materials used in baby diapers, waistbands, and carpets. It makes the chemicals used for plastic bottles and pipes. It owns Georgia Pacific, which makes the wall panels, beams, and plywood required to build homes and office buildings. It makes napkins, paper towels, stationery, newspaper, and personal hygiene products. Koch Industries owns a network of commodities trading offices in Houston, Moscow, Geneva, and elsewhere, which are the circulatory system of modern finance. The book, Cokeland, by Christopher Leonard. You know, every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, you know, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell a list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, you know, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com and you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back to our third hour. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Congressman Ro Khanna is with us for the hour, taking your calls. So if you have questions for Congressman Khanna, he is a congressman from the Silicon Valley area of California. He's also the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. His website, Khanna, K-H-A-N-N-A. Am I spelling that right, Congressman?
You are.
Yeah, okay. I don't have my one sheet in front of me. I'm sorry. I don't know what happened to it. Khanna.house.gov, and you can tweet him at Rep. Ro Khanna. Congressman, what's on your mind today? What's happening in Congress? What are what's the big picture stuff that you'd like us to know about before we start picking up calls for you? By the way, if people want to call, if you want to call Congressman Khanna and share your opinions with him, ask him questions, the number is 202-808-9925. So to you, sir.
Well, I think a lot of my colleagues are talking about the G7 and the consequences of an absence of American leadership. I mean, the reality is you need the American president engaged with Bolsonaro while the Amazon is burning. Why aren't we taking a tougher line, saying that we aren't going to give them the equivalence of NATO status, which is what this President Trump has done, if they don't get that situation under control and if they don't take steps on deforestation. And then with the trade war with China, every day it's a new policy. And you and I have discussed this last time, Tom. I mean, what we really need is a policy that's going to build the industries in this country and have the government involved in the fundamental research and setting up new industries across the country. So I think we're seeing the consequence of failed economic leadership and foreign policy leadership and the impact it's having on the world and our nation.
Yeah, absolutely, definitely. And one other quick question. Well, last night on MSNBC, David K. Johnston, who is, in my mind, a very, very credible figure, suggested that, or said that his understanding is that the Trump tax returns that Deutsche Bank has indicate that many, if not all, of Trump's loans with Deutsche Bank were co-signed by Russian oligarchs or oligarchs from the United Arab Emirates and Turkey, and possibly other countries as well. And if that's the case, and he asserted that Donald Trump never was a billionaire, is not a billionaire, may even have a negative net worth. In other words, he's broke, and has been for since his bankruptcies. Were it not for these oligarchs helping him out. So A, you've got that. B, it seems that Justin Kennedy was the head of Deutsche Bank's real estate lending division, which is where Trump was getting his loans, $1 billion in loans, including for the Doral, apparently. Justin Kennedy, who was the son of Justice Anthony Kennedy, and at the inauguration, Trump walked up to Anthony Kennedy, and Politico wrote about this, and said, "Nice boy you've got there. He's a good kid." And by way of saying, I know your son and all this kind of stuff. And now there's speculation that Trump basically implied to Kennedy that his son's participation in Trump's crimes, or shady dealings, shall we say, may be revealed if Kennedy didn't step off the court, that would reduce the political pressure.
Wow.
Now, if this is pure speculation, this latter part, the stuff from David K. Johnson about the oligarchs owning him, he's claiming is real. If these things come out, is that enough to turn the Republicans against Donald Trump? I was just asking former Congressman Bob Ney, who was Republican from Ohio for years and years, who's very much no longer a Republican, about this, and I said, is there some way that they could replace him on the ticket? I was tweeting about this morning. Maybe Romney Haley ticket or something like that, a quote moderate ticket. And Bob said he didn't think that there was a way that the RNC could replace Trump unless he was impeached. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on all that, and how that might play out with your colleagues, and how it might play out with the Democrats, and how it might play into impeachment if these things turn out to be the case.
Well, I've come out for an impeachment inquiry, and I think now you have the overwhelming majority of the House that has come out for it. So I anticipate that we're going to be very, very aggressive when we head back in the fall. And I'm on the House Oversight Committee, and Chairman Cummings, as you know, has requested the Deutsche Bank financial records. And Trump is so concerned about those coming out that he has taken the extraordinary step of suing in his personal capacity, not as President of the United States, but in his personal capacity to prevent the release. And, of course, he's lost the initial hearings because a President of the United States doesn't have the same expectation of privacy. So it would not surprise me at all if his real concern, and the reason he doesn't want his tax returns to come out or financial records to come out, is that it's going to show extraordinary influence of foreign lenders. And we know this because none of the domestic lenders, the New York banks, none of them were willing to lend him money. So where did he go? And that is something I do think that will come out in greater detail in the fall. Chairman Cummings is going to be relentless. Now, whether it convinces the Republicans or not, I've been saying for 2.5 to 3 years, certainly this is going to get the Republicans to speak out, and I've been wrong almost every time. So I am reluctant to say that the Republicans are going to break with him, especially when he's polling at about 90% amongst Republican primary voters. I mean, he's not clearing 45% amongst the general electorate, but in these very conservative districts, he's still popular. And unless those numbers change, I don't see many Republicans, at least in the House, having the courage to speak out against him.
Is there any venue in which Anthony Kennedy could be questioned as to whether he experienced any pressure from Donald Trump to resign from the Supreme Court, or is that just beyond the pale?
No, that's actually, it's the first I'm hearing about that, and it's deeply concerning, and I will raise it with both Chairman Cummings and Chairman Nadler. I mean, either the House Oversight Committee or the House Judiciary Committee would be the appropriate places to question him. That's very much within the jurisdiction of the United States Congress. Whether there was a conflict of interest that forced someone off the Supreme Court. Now the question is whether Justice Kennedy would be willing to speak, but certainly it should be pursued.
Yeah, I'll send you the links to the stories when I'm off the air. Fascinating stuff. So let's pick up some phone calls here. People want to talk to you. Every single line is jammed up, and I'm sorry I've been monopolizing you. James in Spokane, Washington. You're on the air with Congressman Ro Khanna.
Tom, hello, guys.
I'm not real familiar with this stuff, but you've implied that a lot of our antitrust laws, Taft-Hartley and such as that, they're still on the books.
Taft-Hartley is not antitrust. I've been talking about the Sherman Act and the ones that followed it. And yes, they're all on the books. I'm sorry. So your question for Congressman Khanna is what?
I just wonder why the presidents, Democrat and Republican, have been derelict in not doing their duty. And I mean, my goodness, what can we do to hold their feet to the fire?
There you go, Congressman.
Well, James, I agree with you that these laws are on the books, but what happened is Robert Bork, who was a failed Supreme Court nominee, wrote a famous book in the 1970s that said that the only standard for antitrust, the only thing that mattered was consumer welfare. And it was a complete revisionist account of the purpose of these antitrust laws. The antitrust laws were there because we didn't believe we should have big institutions with a lot of economic power, that was subversive to democracy. They had nothing to do with consumer welfare. Bork reinterpreted the entire the case law on antitrust, and as a result, the administrations have been very reluctant to pursue cases against monopolies because they argue, well, consumers are doing fine. In some of the cases, consumers aren't doing fine, but it's just given the businesses a hook in which to evade enforcement. There is good work being done by people like Lena Khan and Matt Stoller to reverse the Bork doctrine, and I think you're going to see the next Democratic president, especially if it's a progressive one, enforce antitrust much more strongly and not be guided by the Bork principles.
That would be great. I'm writing a book about monopoly right now. In fact, I just got Bork's book, The Antitrust Paradox. I was reading it yesterday afternoon. Anyhow, Congressman Ro Khanna is with us taking your calls for the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Khanna in just a moment.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
He is the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus and a member of the U.S. House of Representatives representing Silicon Valley, the 17th District of California. I gotta get this. There we go. And welcome back. Let's see here. Aaron in Minneapolis, you are on the air with Congressman, excuse me, I just elevated you, Congressman.
You're giving me a promotion.
With Congressman Khanna.
Hello, thank you.
Hey, Aaron, what's your question for Congressman Khanna?
Thank you so much. I got confused because I'm listening on the radio.
Don't do that.
Yeah,
you got to listen on your phone.
And they just went to commercial.
Oh, in that case, you're listening. You're listening to AM 950 in Minneapolis. I'll come back to you when we're back on the air with them. I'm sorry, I didn't realize. Patricia in Portage, Wisconsin, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yeah, I'm calling about the burning of the Amazon and the underlying issue that it's being burned for animal agriculture and soybeans to feed animals and the worldwide market for that. And I have been campaigning to get the issue of biodiversity loss and a million species going extinct onto the Democratic debates. And I guess since it's so hard to get climate on there, it would be...
So, Patricia,
really
what's your question for Congressman Khanna?
Yeah, can we get biodiversity and extinction of life on this planet onto the Democratic debates?
Thank you.
Patricia, we should. I mean, we should have had a climate change debate because it relates to everything. And we need to have a biodiversity debate because, as you're correctly pointing out, even if we could replant 1 trillion trees, which we don't have the technology to do, that's not going to bring back the biodiversity that the Amazon represents. I mean, it's not just about the trees. It's about the entire ecosystem that has taken thousands of years to create. So we ought to be debating this, and there are things we can do. I mean, Trump's trade war has partly exacerbated this because Brazil now sees an opportunity to supply soybeans into China. There has been no accountability from the Trump administration on Bolsonaro. And Macron, I mean, as well-intentioned as he may be, he doesn't have the standing to do something to Brazil. Brazil can disregard it. But the United States does have the ability, if we were to take action to get Bolsonaro to comply. Trump's just unwilling to do so.
Aaron in Minneapolis, you're on the air with Congress. Oh, Aaron, I'm sorry. I'm going to put you on when we come back from the break. Peter's listening to WCPT. Hang on just a second here. Charisse in Independence, Missouri, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi, Tom. Anything goes summer.
Yeah, what's your question for Congressman Khanna?
I'll have to call back because I had.
Okay, thank you very much. Congressman, I'm sorry, we've got 38 seconds here. You were talking about Bolsonaro, and so it's too little time to put somebody on. You were talking about Bolsonaro and Brazil. Do you think Congress is going to do anything about this?
We should. I mean, I have a bill with Deb Haaland that would at least revoke their status as a non-NATO ally, and we should condition imports, which they very much need. They need American markets to them taking steps on controlling deforestation. I mean, they did that before in 2014, before Bolsonaro came to power. Of course, he came to power in a very corrupt way, and some of the progressives were speaking out about the imprisonment of Lulu and other issues. But we need to make it clear that it can't be business as usual with Brazil while he doesn't do anything on deforestation or doesn't take aggressive enough action to fight the fires.
Yeah, amen. We'll be right back with more of Congressman Ro Khanna taking your calls for the hour. Stick around. You know, every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell the list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com. And you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Congressman Ro Khanna is with us taking your calls for the hour. And Aaron in Minneapolis. Aaron, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hey, Tom, can you hear me?
Yes, faintly.
Great.
Speak up.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much, and thank you, Rep. Khanna, for making yourself available for us. I am calling to talk about and ask about the new VSAP touchscreen systems that are going into LA County, which are very similar to the unverifiable touchscreen voting systems that are going into like South Carolina and Georgia and places around the country. I'm wondering why California and LA County, in such a progressive, stronghold of this country, would be moving away from a paper ballot system to a completely 100% unverifiable touchscreen system. It's similar to what was going on or was happening in Georgia and South Carolina and all over the country: Ohio, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Texas, West Virginia, Kentucky, New York, New Jersey, Kansas,
Got it, Aaron.
Tennessee, Indiana, South Carolina, North Carolina, and yes, California.
Okay.
Let's
get the answer to the question. Thank you.
Well, Aaron, I'm very sympathetic to your point. I mean, Mark Pocan is the chair of the Progressive Caucus. We have legislation that he's introduced to have a paper ballot and verification system for every election county in this country. I mean, we need paper ballot verification, and not having that, I think, is a huge risk given what we saw last election cycle. So I can't speak to the specifics of why Los Angeles is doing that, but I think it's a mistake not to have paper ballot verification.
Peter in Chicago, listening on WCPT. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hello, guys. Two real quick things. One is, Congressman, I don't know if there's, you guys keep talking about Trump's tax returns, and I think they should be out for the public as well as all of Congress members' tax returns. So if there's not a bill, which I don't think there is, would you be willing to write a bill and have it sponsored that all of Congress and the president, vice president have to put their tax returns out every year?
Sure. I mean, I think we have those bills already, but I do know we have massive financial disclosures requirements for Congress and the Senate, which this president hasn't even disclosed what every member of Congress and senator has to disclose. I mean, it's really mind-boggling to me that, for example, for a member of Congress, anytime you have a transaction over $1,000 in any equity, you have to disclose that. You have to disclose in great detail any financial interests, and at the very least, we should have the president required to do that. But I would have no problem with a law that says that members of Congress should also have to disclose their taxes.
Tim in South Bend, Indiana. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Right. Thank you, Tom. And thank you, Congressman. I've recently been diagnosed as disabled, and for some reason I've lost my insurance, and I won't be able to get Medicare Plan A or B until December 1st of this year. And I know Tom's talked about staying away from the Medicare for All plans because they're for-profit.
No, not Medicare for All, Medicare Advantage.
Oh, Medicare Advantage.
Right.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I had that wrong. But I was just wondering, what do I do, before December 1st in order to get, coverage for dental, vision care, and prescription drugs as well?
Yeah. Tim, thank you. Question, Congress?
Well, Jim, first of all, let me say I'm very sorry to hear about your situation. And this is exactly why we need Medicare for All that would cover the dental and vision and wouldn't have copays for prescription drugs. I mean, right now, as you point out, Medicare doesn't cover dental, it doesn't cover vision, it doesn't cover long-term care. And so the only option for folks, unfortunately, is to take private insurance, and then if they can't afford private insurance, they often have to be in financial hardship and end up on Medicaid. This is exactly why we need a strong Medicare system, and Bernie Sanders in the Senate has proposed that plan. In terms of your personal situation, if you contact our office, I'm happy to put you in touch with your member of Congress in your district to see if there's anything we can do. But unfortunately, there are a lot of gaps in the current system.
How did, we just have 40 seconds until we're going to hit a break here. How did these holes appear in Medicare? I mean, when I've been trying to research this, and it's like, the internet is so cluttered these days. When Medicare was rolled out in the 60s, did it have these 20% holes in it, just waiting to be filled by for-profit insurance companies, or were they put there later?
My understanding is that they were there from the program's conception because there wasn't an understanding as much about the link between dental health and your overall health. There wasn't an understanding about vision to the extent that we do today and the need for regular checkups.
No, I mean the 20% the Medicare Part B doesn't cover, where people have to buy Medigap plans.
Yeah. No, I think that those were there too, but I could be wrong.
Yeah. Okay. I've got to dig into this and find out. It's making me crazy. Congressman Ro Khanna is on the line with us, taking your calls for the hour. Khanna.house.gov is his website. You can tweet him at RepRoKhanna, Khanna. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
In addition to representing the 17th District of California, more or less Silicon Valley, Congressman Khanna is also the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. Our book today is The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America by a guy named Thom Hartmann. This is from the introduction, A Rebellion Against Monarchy. And it opens with a quote from Abraham Lincoln. The candid citizen must confess that if the policy of the government upon vital questions affecting the whole people is to be irrevocably fixed by decisions of the Supreme Court the instant they are made, then in ordinary litigation between parties and personal actions, the people will have ceased to be their own rulers, having, to that extent, practically resigned their government into the hands of that imminent Supreme Court tribunal. It's from his first inaugural speech, explaining why he was refusing to recognize Dred Scott. From the time Americans wake up in the morning throughout their days, work or play, right through a full night's sleep, everything they do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched in one way or another by the Supreme Court. Food, drugs, transportation, clothes, furniture, roadways, water, septic, electricity, everything in modern life is regulated in some way, either in manufacture, distribution, sale, or use. And those regulations are allowed or disallowed ultimately by the U.S. Supreme Court. At home and in the workplace, Americans' lives are regulated by the Supreme Court also, whether there can be a minimum wage or unemployment insurance, how much power employers have over labor unions and employees, whether consumers can sue when harmed by products or corporate actions, and how far police and other agencies can go in prosecuting, or sometimes persecuting, individuals or entire groups of people. The court determines and defines the limits of your right to protest and your right to a free press. It has final say in everything from taxation to regulation, from public space to private space, from contraception to marriage. Both directly and indirectly, the court determines how wealth can be earned, accumulated, and disposed of. It decides how far the rich can go in exploiting the poor and working people, and whether working people can fight back. Meanwhile, America has ended up, mostly since around 1980, with one of the most corrupted political systems in the developed world, with billionaires and big corporations literally writing legislation to benefit themselves, from the federal to state to local levels. As Tim Wu wrote for the New York Times in March 2019, quote, about 75% of Americans favor higher taxes for the ultra-wealthy. The idea of a federal law that would guarantee paid maternity leave attracts 67% support. 83% favor strong net neutrality rules for broadband, and more than 60% want stronger privacy laws. 71% think we should be able to buy drugs imported from Canada, and 92% want Medicare to negotiate for lower drug prices, end quote. Yet Congress as a whole has not even once seriously considered any of these things in decades. The reason, quite simply, is literally billions of dollars of politically poisonous cash flowing from corporations and ideologically motivated billionaires into the bloodstream of our body politic. And it wasn't Congress or any president in history who changed laws to make this possible. It was the Supreme Court. Right now, and throughout much of U.S. history, the ideological makeup of the U.S. Supreme Court has had little resemblance to the political makeup of our nation. In 2019, for instance, solid majorities of Americans supported a woman's right to access abortion and birth control, voting rights, a national health care system, well-funded public schools and free education through college, higher taxes on corporations to pay for infrastructure and an expanded social safety net, and regulation of corporate behavior from pollution to banking. These are issues that enjoy majority support from working Americans and American communities, but not from corporate America or America's billionaires. As this book shows in parts 1 and 2, the court has historically almost always sided with the wealthy, the powerful, and the corporate against the poor, the weak, and the individual. In many cases, these decisions have struck down laws passed by Congress and signed by the president, a process called judicial review. This book answers the core questions about the Supreme Court's decisive role in determining the fate of the planet. Why did the framers create the Supreme Court? What is judicial review, and how does it make the Supreme Court what Thomas Jefferson, post-1803, called a despotic branch? How does the history of the U.S. Constitution explain the court's frequent decisions in favor of the wealthy and corporations? When has the court sided with popular opinion? And how have people successfully challenged the court in the past? How did a 20th century coalition of businesses and billionaires seize control of the American government, including the Supreme Court? And why is this now a planetary crisis? Most important, what can Americans do about all this? In the beginning, there were those among the founders and framers of the Constitution who didn't mean for the court to have this much power. Thomas Jefferson was among them. Part 1 of this book dives into the philosophies that guided the men who drafted the Constitution. It also shows how in 1803, the Supreme Court set itself above Congress and the president, with the power to review, strike down, or rewrite laws based on its own lone interpretation of the Constitution. Importantly, the framers of the Constitution gave no consideration to the rights of nature or even of the environment, other than its sheer productive potential to enhance the wealth of the nation. Instead of the environment, when the Constitution was written in the summer and fall of 1787, the new thing in political circles was the idea of property rights for commoners, which had only clearly been articulated outside of the realm of royal prerogatives during the previous few centuries. John Locke wrote in his 1689 Two Treatises of Government that the main purpose of government was to make sure that, quote, no one may take away or damage anything that contributes to the preservation of anyone else's life, liberty, health, limb, or goods. It's The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America by Thom Hartmann.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Congressman Ro Khanna is on the line with us, taking your calls for the hour. And Craig in Halsman Bay, California. Am I saying that right, Craig?
Yes, Tom, and I love your show. By the way, I took your advice and wrote out my question for Ro. It'll take about 15 seconds plus this introduction. Let's see how I deliver it. Hello, Ro Khanna. This is Craig Mead in Half Moon Bay. I'm going to send an invitation to your office for a coastal cup of coffee. Hopefully, our meeting will accelerate your progressive agenda using artificial intelligence and quantum computing. I promise it'll be interesting. Also, congratulations on nurturing a thriving...
Craig, what's your question for Congressman Khanna?
Okay. Given up...
Okay, I'm sorry. I just can't do this. Sam in Houston, Texas. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hello. I have a comment and then a quick question.
Please ask a question.
You. Oh, okay. I want to know what plan liberal progressives have for dealing with the 200,000 homeless on the streets of California, other than just support this Ponzi scheme of unlimited immigration to take the jobs. You want those people to come in and support the...
Okay, got it. You want your thoughts on him on... He raised two issues, Congressman.
Right. Well, Sam, they're totally unconnected. I can tell you that because I am from Silicon Valley and I know what the homelessness problem is in San Jose and I know what it is in San Francisco. And it's absurd to think that homelessness problem has anything to do with immigration. What it has to do with is people who have lost jobs and the high cost of rent and the high cost of buying housing in the area, and it has to do with some of the veterans who aren't getting treated for post-traumatic stress, and it has to do with our inability to treat people who have mental health illness or who have issues with alcohol or drug addiction. And what we need to do is have massive new investment in affordable housing and the wraparound services that are needed to put people back into homes and to get them into their lives. But to point the blame on the border is not just wrong, but it also isn't solving the actual problem, which is the lack of affordable housing.
Jeff in Portland, Oregon. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hey, good day to you, Tom and Congressman Khanna. Thanks for taking my call. My concern and best wishes for Puerto Rico and all those in the path of the storm this week.
Amen.
So, Congressman, yesterday Tony Schwartz, author of Trump's book, Art of the Deal, tweeted that, quote, Trump's singular advantage is his willingness to lie about anything and everything without shame, end quote. So it begs the question, Congressman, besides progressivism and the truth, what more do we need to vanquish Trumpism and all the crises he's exacerbated? And in my mind, it's one thing, audacity. It's understanding that in this age of spectacle, political theater matters. If you're not doing it, the other side will. So, Congressman Khanna, my question for you is this. Trump said over and over in 2016 that our voting process is a fixed and rigged system. And he's continued to make comments.
Jeff, what's your question for Congressman Khanna?
So my question for the Congressman, knowing what we know about the insecurity and reliability of electronic voting.
Okay, let me just say this, and Congressman Khanna, we both know where Jeff was going with that question. I'm going to ask people, this is an opportunity to ask a question of the Vice Chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus and a member of Congress, and you ask the damn question. I mean, just get right to it. And otherwise, it's horribly impolite to all the other people. I've got 8 people waiting on hold, 10 people waiting on hold right now to ask a question, and people are filibustering. Congressman, your response to this guy's call?
Well, look, Jeff, I share your frustration. I get it. We're trying to get paper ballots. We're trying to do everything we can to secure the elections, and the Progressive Caucus is working on it. I will say this. I agree with you that Trump's comparative advantage is his shamelessness of lying, but in the long run, I do believe the truth prevails. And when you look at great historical leaders, whether it's Gandhi, whether it's Mandela, whether it's King, whether it's great American politicians, ultimately the truth does prevail.
Larry in Charlotte, North Carolina. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hey, Tom.
Hey, Larry. Ask your question, please.
Yeah, I'd just like to know, I'd like to ask a question to the Congressman. How does he intend to pay for this Medicare for all? And I ask that because at 65, I wasn't given a choice to go on Medicare. And they take $125 a month from my Social Security in order to pay for it, and I can't use it for anything. I recently went in the hospital in 17, and I'm still paying off the bill.
Okay, Larry, thank you. Congressman?
Well, Larry, I appreciate that, and I agree with you that Medicare right now is not sufficient, and that's why we need to strengthen Medicare to make sure that if you are hospitalized, that you're not going to have to be paying the bill if you're on Medicare. And I'd urge you to look at the bill that Pramila Jayapal and Bernie Sanders have on Medicare for All. The first thing it does is make sure you're not going to have these out-of-pocket costs. How are we going to pay for it? What we're going to do is eliminate all of the profits currently that are going to pay Aetna CEO $56 million, that are going to the pharmaceutical companies, that are going to the hospital administrators. They're the ones who are making out under the current system, and none of those excessive profits are going to be in the system, and that's how we're going to be able to provide better care for individuals under Medicare for All, and there will be higher progressive taxation and an estate tax. So that's how we're going to pay for it, but your life will be better off under Medicare for All because Medicare is going to be strengthened to cover far more things like your hospitalization.
Daniel in Ontario, Canada. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Oh, wonderful. It happens I called in last year about springtime and spoke to the congressman, and I had said my father just returned from Florida, and he was telling me how there was real support for Trump, and I couldn't believe this. So I called to ask if there was a possibility he could actually be reelected. And at the time, the congressman seemed absolutely certain that he wouldn't be reelected. And I'm getting more and more nervous as time goes on. I'm wondering if he thinks it's more likely, less likely. He just wants his opinion on that.
Well, Daniel, I appreciate chatting again. Look, you can never underestimate an incumbent American president. There are only 8 American presidents, incumbents, who have ever lost. I didn't think there was any shot that Donald Trump would become president of the United States. He did. I was wrong. So I'm certainly not going to make the mistake of underestimating him a second time or underestimating an incumbent president. That said, I think there are an extraordinary amount of people who realize that their lives are not any better off. He promised to bring manufacturing jobs back. The manufacturing index shows that manufacturing has contracted for the first time in 10 years. He has promised to improve the lives of people in rural America. They haven't seen more jobs or money in their pocket. And he has embarrassed us on the world stage. So I do believe that if we have a strong candidate who campaigns in every state with vigor, that we should be able to beat him. But it's not going to be a layup.
Josh in Boulder, Colorado. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hey, Tom. Congressman Khanna, recent studies on LSD, MDMA, and psilocybin have shown great promise with treating PTSD, anxiety, and depression. You supported AOC's proposal to expand medical research on magic mushrooms and also co-sponsored the bill to end federal prohibition of marijuana. Why not also psilocybin, LSD, and MDMA?
Well, Josh, I'm happy to look at the issue. I mean, if you're talking about medical research and if there are scientific studies that show that there can be medical research that advances cures, then I'm happy to support any of that type of medical research, but I'm happy to look into the specifics of what you mentioned.
Richard in Springfield, Missouri. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Congressman, it's a pleasure to talk to you. I was wondering if you knew of a way that we could eliminate the fossil fuel industry influence in the DNC. That was my question.
Thank you,
Richard. It's a great question. I mean, not only have they not had a climate change debate, but the DNC continues to take money from the fossil fuel industry, and they continue to take corporate money. And I don't see why they need to do that. I mean, President Obama had eliminated corporate contributions or PAC contributions into the DNC. He managed to win 2 terms. So you don't even have to be as progressive as Senator Sanders or Senator Warren. President Obama did that, and they reversed that policy once he left, and they've continued to reverse that policy. I think we have to really push hard to say that the DNC shouldn't be taking any corporate money.
Michael in St. Louis, Missouri. Hey, 2 Missouri calls back to back. Michael, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yes, hi, everybody. The Washington Post is reporting that President Trump has told his aides that if they do anything illegal in building a wall, he will pardon them. This, I wonder, would it be considered an additional article of impeachment by the Democratic House?
Right, and just FYI, the White House has now said that he was joking. Congressman?
Well, Michael, it's convenient how the White House, the only explanation they have for the president's latest outlandish statements is that he was either joking or that or he was misguided. I mean, they're walking something back almost every day, but it's outrageous. I mean, think about it this way. I mean, what if the president of the United States were to say, go commit murder, I'm going to pardon you? Obviously, there have to be some restrictions to the pardon power. It's not absolute. We don't elect a king in this country. I mean, the pardon power has never been challenged or defined in the Supreme Court, but my guess is there would be abuses of that power that people would recognize violate a nation that is governed by law. My view is that telling people to go do something in exact defiance of Congress constitutes that. And I think Congress should, frankly, we should limit and define what the presidential power, pardon power is.
Congressman Ro Khanna taking your calls for the hour. He's the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, represents the 17th District of California, and his website is khanna.house.gov.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
That is KHANNA.house.gov. His Twitter handle is Rep. Ro Khanna. And welcome back. Colleen in Long Island, New York. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Oh yes. Hello. How are you guys? What I wanted to bring up was the inevitable implosion of the Republican Party. And if you think of it like a business model, if you will, the fact that they cannot sustain what they have going. And it doesn't matter whether you're talking about climate control or law enforcement or educational debt. I mean, you just have everything that coalesces into this party becoming, just frying themselves. And I wanted to know what the congressman thought of that.
Colleen, I think it's an excellent point. It made me think of the analogy of having a short-term thinker as a CEO who cares simply about immediate profit maximization for the next quarter or the immediate earnings to satisfy the stock analysts, and isn't thinking about whether this is going to be good for the business 4, 5, 10 years from now, and often ends up bankrupting the business by cutting research and development or investment. I think that's exactly the model the Republicans are following. They are trying to maximize their advantage in the 2020 election, oblivious to the changing demographics of the country, oblivious to the young generation and the issues they care about. oblivious to the types of investments and technology that are going to be needed. I hope it doesn't succeed at all in the next cycle, but even if they scrape by with some victories in the next cycle, I don't think without fundamental transformation that it's sustainable for the future.
Gail in Sterling, New Jersey. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask, what do you think the consequences will be for Trump's blatant trampling all over the emoluments clause and using the presidency to make money? Thank you.
Yeah, it's one of the most distasteful parts of this president that he has privatized the public trust. I mean, I serve with people in Congress, Republicans and Democrats. There are very few people here who actually are in these jobs to personally make money. There may be a lot of other problems with them, but they're not as shameless as this president has been, who's promoting his own resorts, promoting his own properties. And the consequence is going to be that Jerry Nadler is starting an impeachment inquiry come this fall, and we're going to see all of that exposed.
When is Congress back in session? We have 40 seconds.
September 9th.
September, so it's about 2 weeks.
About 2 weeks.
Yeah. Do you expect that? I mean, I think the broad public perception has been that the Democrats have controlled the House for what, a year, almost a year.
Yes, almost a year. I mean, it'll be a year come January.
And things just seem to be moving painfully slowly. On the other hand, if a lot of this stuff really explodes, it would probably be more effective at taking down Trump politically if it explodes closer to the election than now. I realize that they're putting a political spin on a legal issue, but what are your thoughts?
Well, I think the reason it's moved slower than some people would have liked is Nadler and Speaker Pelosi were being very careful in making sure we built up the legal case, that we did everything methodically. I think Nadler feels like he's in that position now, and he's going to be very, very aggressive come the fall. So I do think by the end of the year we're going to know where we're at. And I anticipate that it's going to be, people will be pleased with those hearings.
Great. Every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell a list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com and you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you. Welcome back. We're talking with Congressman Ro Khanna, taking your calls for the hour. And
Tom,
yes, sir.
Really quickly, I had my staff, Will McKelvey, who does all of my healthcare work, look up the issue, and he said that 20% coinsurance under Part B has always been there, and it was part of the design that patients should, quote unquote, have skin in the game. Otherwise, they would overuse healthcare. I mean, a terrible reason, but that's what his research found.
Or maybe that's what it took to get it through Congress in 1960. What was it, 67, something like that?
Yeah.
So, yeah, fascinating. Thank you. Milton in Suffolk, Virginia. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yes, Congressman Khanna, do you support the abolition of the Electoral College? Because we've had 3 presidents now that have been elected not by the popular vote.
Well, Milton, here's what I support. I think that states, as California has, can voluntarily move towards a compact that says they're going to allocate their votes to the popular vote winner. And if you can get 2 states that up to 270 do that, then you, in effect, will render the popular vote winner the winner. And there are a lot of people who have been working on that. I forget where the pledges are at, but I think that's the best way forward to reform the system. short of that, also, you at the very least should have proportional representation of votes. That wouldn't take care of all of the inequities, but it would be something that would help.
Dan in Williamsburg, Pennsylvania. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yes, thank you for taking my call. My question relates to Michael Cohen's warning to the nation that there will be no peaceful transition of power. And I'm wondering if Trump loses the next election and decides that, or declares that it's an illegitimate election or rigged, and he decides to stay, what actual power does the Congress have to remove him? And is there a precedent for any president doing this in the past?
Dan, I appreciate the question. I may be overly optimistic, and you may think it's naive, but I don't think it will come to that, and let me tell you why. Here's the reality. I mean, in the 2016 election, the House and the Senate both certified the election. In fact, you may remember Vice President Biden was presiding over it, and he didn't even let Representative Jayapal make her objection. So it was overwhelmingly certified by the House and the Senate. I do not think the House and Senate would, and certainly the House, would not certify an election if Donald Trump lost. And I have to believe that even in today's polarized environment, that the Supreme Court would recognize the House certification of an election and that the military would side with the House and the Supreme Court. So I don't see a situation where Trump is there in defiance of Congress's certification, and we should be aware that it was the entire Congress that certified the 2016 election.
Linda in Broken Bow, North Dakota. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna. We got about a minute and 15 seconds before the end of the show.
I'm in Broken Bow, Oklahoma.
Oklahoma. Okay, great. Go ahead.
Yes, sir. Is there any way that Congress can stop the deportation of the sick immigrant children? Because they're going to do it in 33 days.
Linda, it's a very important question. I was down in Juarez earlier this month. What we're doing in terms of turning away asylum seekers and basically a return to Mexico policy, I think is a stain on our moral conscience. And we are, of course, returning children who are sick, in some cases who aren't prepared to make that journey and who don't have sufficient nutrition or medical care. We will continue to do everything possible from Congress to hold the Department of Homeland Security accountable to those basic hygiene, health, and nutrition standards, and making it clear that they shouldn't be transporting or sending back kids who have health issues. The second thing I would say is, when I was in Juarez, there were 20,000 people there who were all being treated with decency, asylum seekers. I mean, they were in rooms with maybe 8 beds, and it wasn't ideal conditions, but they had basic nutrition, they had basic health care. And I said to them, you've got 20,000 people. How are you dealing with this when we were not able to on our side of the border? And the person looked at me and he said, Congressman, in our country, we don't fear migrants. You do. And then he said, what is galling to us is that even you're sending them back to Mexico, you're having us house them, and you're not paying a dime. You're not even giving us the aid to house them. So we need to fight hard when we're back in session to uphold some basic humanity and not just absolve ourselves of this responsibility.
Amen. Congressman Ro Khanna, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you so much for having me on.
My pleasure. Always great talking with you. And look forward to the next time. Thanks so much for being with us today. It's been a fascinating show, a lot going on in the world, and we'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. Take the cue of Mark Gamba, who was on our program earlier, who's running for Congress here in Oregon now, after running for mayor. Get involved, get out there, get active. MarkGamba.com, by the way, is his website. Tag You're It. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit ThomHartmann.com.
We say fight back!